Yeah, you're free to start the meeting, Chair.
Super. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Forensics Committee of the Scottish Police Authority. We've got various people in attendance and various apologies. So from Police Scotland, we have Chief Superintendent Suzanne Chow, who's representing ACC Beck-Smith. John Sheehy, Head of Portfolio Delivery, who's representing Andrew Henry. CDIO, it says in my notes. What does CDIO stand for, Colette? Do you know? Does anyone know? Not important. From the Crown Office, we have Ruth McQuaid joining us, and I'm not sure if we've got Craig Naylor or someone else from HMICS.
Sorry, Chair, that's what I was checking there. I don't believe they're on the call as yet, but okay. We're okay to proceed without them.
Yeah. We also, I understand Mary Pitcairn from the SPA board is going to be joining us at some point to observe today's meeting. We have apologies from Caroline Stewart, who's one of our board members, from Vicky Morton of Forensic Services and ACC Beck-Smith, and as I'd indicated, Chief Superintendent Chow is stepping into the plate for our Chief Data Information Officer. That's what CDIO is for. Thanks very much for that. It's death by 1,000 acronyms in this role. So do we have any declarations of interest from board members and anyone else? No? Super, thanks. Okay, that then moves us on to any other business. Has anyone got any other business that they want to raise at the end of the meeting under AOCB? Not seeing any. Okay, super. That moves us then on to item 2, or decision 1.5, the decision to take business in private, which is items 8 to items 10 in accordance with section 20 of the SPA standing orders. So I'm asking members to agree to take agenda items 8 to 10 in private. Can we agree that?
Yes.
Yeah, super. Thanks for that. Grand. That moves us then on to item 2, which is a minute of the previous meeting and the action log from previous meetings. So the first up is the minute of the meeting held on the 4th of May, and that's there for approval. Do any board members or anyone have any matters of accuracy with this? No. Grand. So if we can agree that is the correct record. That then moves us on to the action log. Now, there are 10 actions proposed for closure and 1 for proposed as ongoing. I do have concerns with a number of the actions proposed for closure, and we'll maybe get to those in a second. Jane, you've got your hand up. Yeah, do you want to come in at this point?
No, actually, you've preempted, as it were, because there were a few that are noted for closure that I thought were actually technically still ongoing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll let you, I mean, you may want to walk through the log, but yeah.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. So if you just bear with me. Sorry, I'm working off 5 different documents and 2 different sets of programs here, which is it's hell for a chair. So the first thing is from the meeting held on the 4th of May. That's public action log. Just bear with me. 4th of May 2023 is FSC 001. So ensure sufficient updates relating to ongoing areas of business are provided within the action logs. I think that's okay to close. The second one is the director's report. Ensure the committee have sight of post-implementation review of scenes tasking unit including benefits realised and lessons learned. That's proposed as ongoing. Again, I don't have any particular problem with that. Then third, it's performance report. Ensure the performance report includes a balanced scorecard, including RAG status, and ensure that good performance information is being provided within the report and was not lost to the reader. That's proposed to close. I'm not particularly keen on the performance reporting. We'll get to that in a minute. So maybe if we hold that open just now until we get to that item and we can look at that afterwards. The following one is performance framework. Consider members' comments and provide an update around where this piece of work will be taken. It says that this will be provided to the Forensics Committee in October and proposes to close. Well, I propose it's provided to the committee in October and we keep that open because it's still outstanding. Then number 5 is the strategic workforce plan, it says ensure that SMT are fully engaged with SPA workforce and governance colleagues on this piece of work. And again, I don't think what's written in the column there, once demand forecast has been completed, this will provide the information required. I think that still needs to be kept open. Okay, so that's the meeting in May of this year. The next,
Sorry, Chair, if I may.
Please.
And it's a question. I mean, I absolutely agree. It's still an ongoing. The strategic workforce plan is an ongoing issue. It's a question of whether it might be better to close this and open a new one. I don't really mind, but
well, what would the new one be? No. I think we'll keep this open. Jane's frozen on us momentarily, hopefully momentarily. Okay, so I think we'll just keep this one open. Then we move on to February 2023. Action number 2 of that is provide analysis of how sustainable outsourcing will be. This is proposed to close. Information included in criminal toxicology update. So yeah, I'm happy with closing that because that has been provided. The next is 007, which is a change programme. Format of the programme is updated. I'm content that we close that if people are supportive of that. Then we've got October 2022, which is again performance reporting. And it says we want data in relation to lab capacity and demand made richer by mapping people into this. And it says here that unit cost activity is ongoing and will be included in reports when available. So I'm not suggesting we close that either because that's still outstanding. Number 3 there, further down, performance report again. Ensure future reports provided more trend data in relation to scene examination. And it says here that scene prioritisation is underpinned by the PSAFS scene attendance policy and guidance, see section below, so I'll propose to close that. The biometrics landscape, there's a little bit missing from that. That should say, what is it? Fiona Douglas to report on expected, which is director to report on expected timeframes for delivery of projects noted in the report. So I think the director has done that. So if we propose to close that, that takes us to the 25th of April 2022. And again, explore opportunities for benchmarking. Well, I don't think this should be closed as we don't really have benchmarking in the performance report. It does make reference to it in the director's report, but I'm going to consider that, suggest that we keep that open also. Okay, any questions on that? So it's still quite a bit outstanding, but we've got to have these there so they don't get lost in the ether. So I'm sorry we've taken a bit of time over that. Right, so that's the action log. That then moves us on to the director's report, which is the director, Fiona Douglas. So
thank you, Chair.
Fiona.
So I'll provide a brief summary on the matters that are set out within my report. So initially, with regards to budget, Forensic Services is on target to deliver a balanced budget for this financial year. I'll come on when we get to that agenda item to talk in more detail around the financial position. But I'm pleased to be able to report to members that we are on track to deliver a balanced budget. There has been an overspend in relation to outsourcing for post-mortem toxicology services, which has been mitigated by an underspend within the staff costs. And again, as we move into into discussions in the performance report, we'll be able to see the impact of the outsourcing for post-mortem toxicology. With regards to our change programme, there's been an awful lot of work that's been delivered since the last committee meeting with regards to the implementation of the new operating model for forensic services, with the new scenes structure now in place, which is part of our new search and recovery capability, which was previously our scene examination discipline within forensic services. And as part of that, we've also implemented the new management structure into forensic services, including the new capability team manager role, and very pleased that we've had 2 phases of initial training for the new management role within forensic services since the last committee meeting. We've also appointed the Research Development and Innovation Manager into Forensic Services and are starting to establish that RD&I capability within the organisation, which is particularly important about making sure that we're strategically aligning any change and development work that is happening across forensic services in line with the forensic services strategy. Moving into criminal toxicology, and just to highlight that we have changed the terminology here around introducing criminal in front of toxicology, and that's to make sure that we're inclusive to our new colleagues in post-mortem toxicology. So it's to separate the difference between the 2 units, one of which is undertaking criminal work and the other that's undertaking the post-mortem toxicology work. We had a very successful visit from the United Kingdom Accreditation Service on the 5th of July to look at the progress that the unit have made in relation to our accreditation, and have made a number of agreements with UCAS that we can reduce the frequency of reporting to them in regards to the work that's ongoing within criminal toxicology. So it's really pleasing to see the improvement that we've seen within that area in relation to our accreditation. With regards to performance, we have introduced a new performance report. Very thankful for feedback from members previously that has helped us to create the format for the new performance report. And we've also been able to include the key performance indicators, which are included within the revised memorandum of understanding, which is also brought to the committee today as a final version, which is just in the final stages of being signed off. With regards to benchmarking, which we touched upon in the action register, it is extremely difficult to benchmark forensic science organisations against each other because no 2 forensic organisations have the same structure, same funding model, or commercial or public sector organisations. We have made the decision to initially focus on benchmarking within our scene examination area. And there is ongoing work, as detailed within my paper, to look at how we can bring together some benchmarking information for members so they can see how our services compare to other similar organisations. And the initial forces that we're in contact with in that regard is Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Surrey, Sussex and Metropolitan Police. So there are a number of areas which we are looking at benchmarking, which we will bring back to the committee. Beyond scene examination, we will be looking at where else we can benchmark and any organisations that are prepared to share information in relation to performance. We've had a number of really successful collaborative projects that have been running in forensic services, and 2 of which are referred to in my report. The first around some collaborative work that's been undertaken within our fingerprint area, which resulted in a very successful presentation at a conference in relation to computer-assisted consensus among Scottish fingerprint experts, which is really looking at how we can bring statistical and evaluative opinion into how forensic evidence is reported. So it's quite novel, and it's particularly important that we're looking at that in line with the new forensic science regulators' codes of practice. We've also had the initial burn in our new fire investigation facility, which I know that the chair of the committee was able to also attend, which was up at Porthleven on the 6th of June. This is a significant milestone for the project, and I think it's going to be a really important facility moving forward to allow us to train fire investigators across the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, as well as for forensic services and other colleagues from an academic perspective, and working closely also with the Danish Police Special Crimes Unit. There was a significant conviction in relation to a case of the murder of Amber Gibson, and Connor Gibson, her brother, was convicted of murdering Amber on the 26th of July 2023. This was a substantial case that involved a lot of time and a lot of disciplines within forensic services, and the forensic evidence was extremely important in leading to the conviction in that case. Post-mortem toxicology continues to develop within forensic services, and we'll have the discussion around how the performance in that unit is improving as we move into the performance report. And then just finally, I'd like to make sure that members were aware of the Forensic Services Excellence Awards. We've had a good response rate in terms of nominations for those awards. They're currently being reviewed, and there is a ceremony planned in September to announce the winners of our inaugural Forensic Excellence Awards for this year. Thank you, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Okay, thanks for that. Couple of observations and then a question from me, and then I'll throw it open to other board members. Firstly, the fire investigations research training event was extraordinary, and just like to thank the staff that arranged that. I thought it was a really interesting event. That, and obviously it was to help provide training going forward for forensic staff that are overseeing this. The second thing is the UCAS progress with UCAS. I think staff have to be congratulated over that also, because that is quite significant, a significant move forward. My question is around post-mortem toxicology. Just at this instance, I've got more questions further down the agenda. The publication time scale for the drug death report in August, you're saying it's the same as last year's. Was last year's a late report though?
I'm not aware of last year's reporting, Chair. The reporting would have been done from Glasgow University through to the Crown Office and then into Scottish Government in relation to the provision of the statistics. It's Scottish Government that collate and will report the drugs death statistics.
Forgive me my ignorance in this, Ruth. I don't know, can you maybe help? When does the annual drugs report normally come out? Drugs deaths report. I'm sorry to put you in the spot here. No, Fiona, actually, Fiona, you'll know.
I apologies, I was thrown off. I'm now back on. Thank you. 28th of July, that last year's was published. So that was one of the queries I had, but I don't want to have been off the call for 5 minutes and then repeat everything.
Yeah, but normally in previous years, has it been July or has it been delayed? Yeah. And
normally it would be July, and certainly last year's was the 28th of July.
Grand.
So that was one of my queries. Did we manage to deliver within our traditional timescale, or were we late? Yeah. And the NRS may have been late as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks for that, Fiona. And welcome, Craig Naylor, as well. Okay, Jane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just in relation to benchmarking, and I understand the reservations, and those have been expressed elsewhere, and it's true that every organisation is unique. Nevertheless, I think there are enough commonalities that one ought to be able to establish in some areas and for some measures. I mean, what I would like to suggest is, in terms of the methodology, and when you bring back perhaps something about the methodology, that some of the comparators we look at some of the private providers, because there is exactly this, there are differences between doing in-house provision and outsourcing, so it must be possible to do some benchmarking against private, but also just who is the team that is doing this. It would be good to see some independent or other provision, other persons involved in the project team, so it's not forensic services devising the tests for and marking its own homework. So can I simply encourage that in terms of the methodology that you adopt, both in the comparators you choose and how that work is carried out? And can you give us then something of a timescale for that?
I'll perhaps ask Derek if you could offer a timescale around the scene examination work that's currently undertaken, then I'll come back and answer the other part of your question, Jane.
Certainly, Fiona, thanks, Chair. The timescale for that, we are in a state of flux at the moment in terms of moving to the new operating model for scene examination, for example. Went live, as is in the report, 3rd of July. So we're at the point where we need to reach a steady state to be able to benchmark properly against data, which we can get potentially from other forces, as mentioned in there. What we have already got is some of the policies which they have, so we're able to compare some of those, and we have shown some differences in those in terms of attendance to scenes and what's recovered. In terms of timescales, I would expect us to be in a steady state towards the end of this calendar year. So that may be a more appropriate time to do a data-based comparison against other forces.
So if we are in a state of flux in respect to scene examination, which I entirely accept, is there not an area in which we are more stable and that which you could, we could do some benchmarking for steady state, and that would accelerate the benchmarking? Question mark.
There could be elements certainly of the processes rather than maybe the data, because obviously in the new model our focus is very much more on the volume crime. I've made a commitment to provide a better service in relation to that volume crime, and that is where most of the data lies within the other forces, and that's probably where the most differences may be identified. So that's the area I think we need to retain that steady state prior to that comparison. But in terms of processes and priorities, yes, we could do some work on that.
Yeah, Chair, I don't want to hijack this enormously, but it was just that, it's just I wasn't sure then, given all of that, why scene examination is the one chosen, and whether there wasn't another area in which there was more steady state and you didn't need to wait on these considerations.
If I could come back in, Jane, please. So we did an extensive piece of benchmarking as part of the development of the new operating model for forensic services that looked at our current performance and also what we were proposing in terms of the new structure of the organisation. So we do have benchmarking information which we had shared previously with members. Really, that was more focused around making sure that the decisions we were making around the new operating model weren't completely out of line with the wider forensic community. Scene examination is one of the easier areas in which to do benchmarking, despite the current state of flux, because it's delivered within a policing, within the police forces in England and Wales. So it's more comparable in terms of public sector provision, as well as looking at forces with similar geographical issues and also forces which have the same sort of size and magnitude of scene requests that come in. Comparing a public sector forensic provision with private sector forensic provision is more challenging in terms of the value that you get from the information. We already know that where there's contracted forensic provision, private forensic organisations will have the capacity and they will build the capacity to be able to deliver against a commercial contract so as not to incur financial penalties. Whereas we don't have that same funding model, and our provision is delivered in an entirely different way. I think there's useful comparators there, whether it's so helpful from a benchmarking perspective, because we know that there'll be significant differences, particularly around timeliness, and we know the reasons for that. But we absolutely can develop benchmarking further. Commercial organisations are less open to sharing some of that information because of its commercial information. But you're right that we have outsourcing information in relation to drugs driving toxicology, and we certainly can compare our internal performance against the performance of the outsourcing partner that we have in that area. So again, it's about how useful that comparison could be.
Thank you. That's very useful. And I think capturing all of that and developing those arguments and that context will be very useful. Thank you.
There is an offer to assist with benchmarking from SPA corporate policy staff, if that's theirs. Perhaps you can pursue that offline. So any other questions on this? Fiona McQueen.
Apologies, Chair, it's more a follow-up to the benchmarking, and I think encouraging the team to look at that strategically across the whole range. So there's something about developing strategic relationships across the UK. I don't know if universities can be helpful, because I do understand that other commercial and confidence organisations are maybe less likely to be able to, but sometimes with a university partner, it becomes a bit easier of taking that on. So it's a slower burn and a longer term piece of work, but actually could be helpful.
Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on the director's report? If we can note this, that then moves us on to the next agenda item, which is the Forensic Services Year-End Performance Report. And again, that's you, Fiona Douglas. It's introducing that.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read and just highlight a few areas from the executive summary. There's quite a lot of information within the report, and I'm happy to take any more detailed questions at the end. So this is the review of last financial year, and I think it's really helpful from our perspective to have pulled this report together to share with members, because we've achieved an awful lot during this financial year within forensic services. Fundamentally, it's the first year that the output within the organisation has exceeded the demand for casework coming into the organisation, and that's a significant milestone. And that's allowed substantial improvements to be made in the age and size of the caseload across the organisation. And that really reflects a more flexible approach to how we deal with work within the organisation, but also there has been an overall reduction in demand for forensic services last financial year. Within that demand, though, we see rises within sexual crime, which has been the case and the trend year on year. So we have seen a substantial increase in demand for forensic science in relation to sexual crime work, and also the demand for Group 3 crime, which is crimes of dishonesty, has increased, but it's still tracking below the levels that were seen prior to the pandemic. I think this does very much link into a piece of work which we're progressing around the 5-year demand forecast moving forward, so we can assess whether these trends will continue. The caseload for drugs, which is Group 5 crime, has reduced significantly as a result of a significant drop in demand over that period, which has resulted in substantial improvements in the speed at which drugs casework is being reported across the organisation. Within the financial year, we saw the transfer of post-mortem toxicology services from the University of Glasgow to forensic services, with the staff successfully GPing across into forensic services on the 1st of December, and the initial grant of accreditation by UCAS on the 29th of March of this year. The new tasking unit for our scene examination services was implemented, and there was a substantial period of training for what is a brand new unit of new tasking officers that joined the organisation, and that allows us to professionally and consistently task our scene examiners out across the country, and that actually went live just at the start of this financial year. And I think that we're already seeing some early benefits coming from the introduction of that unit. The Biometrics Commissioner's first Code of Practice took effect on the 16th of November, and there has been a lot of work ongoing within the organisation to make sure that we are complying with that Code of Practice. And we continue to work with the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner in that regard. We have maintained our accreditation over that period, which is, again, it's a substantial process in terms of maintenance of accreditation. And we continue to work on expanding our scope of accredited services into this financial year and beyond. The issues around lack of clarity on the budget caused some delays with regards to the start of the implementation of the new operating model for forensic services. But as I mentioned in my director's update, we have made substantial progress on that implementation once the final budget settlement was agreed. So I'll pause there, Chair, and open to any questions on the rest of the report.
Yeah, I'll maybe kick off with those. The first thing I'm going to maybe touch on is post-mortem toxicology and the transfer across from that. So that happened 9 months ago, so we're 9 months on from that. But we still have seen performance on that dip. And so later on in the performance reports, the average turnaround time the turnaround time of cases has gone from around about 60 in April up to 150 days for that, which is a concern, I think, that we need to note. Can you explain why that's happened? And we're 9 months on from the from this. How long will it take before this position is reversed and we're back to operating properly?
Okay, I'm happy to cover that now, or I can cover that in the performance report.
You might need to do it a number of times, unfortunately.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, so within post-mortem toxicology, they're dealing with samples that require a lot of cleaning up before analysis can be undertaken. When looking at these specific cases, there's a sequential testing activity that happens looking at common substances initially, and then moving into more and more unusual substances. So it's a sequential testing regime. What's happened since the staff transferred across in December is that each of those different tests has been developed on the new instrumentation, and then it's been validated within the unit, as well as ongoing work with colleagues in digital division to bring those instruments onto the Police Scotland network. So it's an extremely complicated process of getting very sensitive instruments, the methods developed, and those methods validated to forensic services standards. So those methods have been being developed. The staff that have joined forensic services from the University of Glasgow have all had to be trained on the new instruments, as well as integrating into the organisation. So that's the programme of work that continues. There was always an expectation that when the staff transferred across and that activity then happened, that there would be an increase in the turnaround time for a period of time. It's fair to say that that period of time has been longer than we originally had planned, and that's due to some challenges around the networking of the instruments and also some challenges around the testing and the validation of the methods themselves. So we have been working very closely with colleagues in the Crown Office over that period to keep them well informed of that initial increase in the turnaround time for the cases, and then that will decrease then quite quickly once all of the methods are completely validated and the staff have completed their training. So the data that you refer to that we reported into the Forensic Services Committee in July related to the 9 cases that were completed at that time, and I think it was the 51 days that you referred to there, Chair. So the turnaround time will increase before it improves, and that's because we're dealing with that bulge of work that sits in the system. So now more of the methods are online, more of that testing can happen. So the older cases are now being reported to the pathologists so they can then report to the Crown in those cases. So we will see a return to what we would expect our performance to be in this area, which is 5 weeks for the non-priority work, and that will be in October that we will revert to that timescale. We have 10% of that work that goes through the post-mortem toxicology unit are the priority cases. So when we're notified by the Crown that a case is a priority, that can already be completed within 4 weeks, which is again the expected level of timeliness from the Crown. So it's an improving position, but the timeliness will get worse before it gets better, because we're reporting the cases that have been sitting in the caseload as those tests have been validated.
So the report also says, that, and you've made reference to the validation of outstanding methods, and in the report it says it will be completed in Q1. Has that work now been completed?
I think, Gary, I'll perhaps ask you to just give a brief update on that.
Yeah, the actual validation of if we're talking about basically 10 tests, which are that does all the work really in terms of that. And I think the final one of those was validated in June in terms of that. So we are basically essentially now fully operational across the whole piece. So that's absolute sterling work to get that done, because it's highly complex in terms of actual methods. And there's something that touches on the quality aspect, and we've had some proficiency tests basically done, which tests how good those tests are, and they're industry leading. They're really good in terms of that. So whilst there's been a lot of pressure on obviously the staff to get these methods working in terms of we've got some really good results in terms of basically the scientific validity of them, which is obviously part of one of our core pieces in terms of ensuring the quality of the work in the whole system.
I've got other board members want to come in on this. So Fiona McQueen first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that, Fiona. And I understand the huge complexity and the change programme that's going on, and some of the cold cases that have been solved are really work to be proud of. But I'm interested in a couple of things, but in this case, the morbid toxicology. So in February, when I asked the question about when things would revert, or when we would get back to having no backlog, I was given assurance that it would be in good time. We weren't told that we would have, so what you're describing is something that I completely understand, but I don't think we were advised that actually we would see this almost backward step. I thought we were advised that when things came over, the backlog was, the advice that the outsourcing had assisted during the transition. So that's from another area, but we were advised that we would see that the backlog would reduce and things would move on. So I'm interested. So in two things. One, what has happened? Did you anticipate that and therefore were we wrongly advised? Or have other things taken place which meant that there was an increased backlog? And then the other thing, and I'll maybe wait till the performance report, Chair, but I'll say it now. It would be helpful if we've been advised about one thing happening and then that doesn't come to pass. It would be helpful from a transparency point of view in the reports for that to be articulated. You advised in February that this would happen, but it's not happened because of that. So that would be helpful. The other aspect then on that area, Fiona, is in October, you say we'll get down to our 5 weeks, which will be really, really helpful. But does that then mean will we have the 5 weeks reported, or will there still be that backlog of the oldest cases bringing the performance down because they've been in the system? So when will we actually see, and it may well be a matrix would be helpful for us to see real-time work coming down, but the lag of reporting might take 2 or 3 months. So when the next committee that we would expect to see as no backlog, meeting the 5 week turnaround time.
Okay, so there's a number of questions in there. So in terms of, I'll take the last one first. The 5 week turnaround time is to report the cases. So it's 5 weeks from when we receive the samples through to when we provide the results of the analysis through to the pathologist, and then the pathologist would report those cases. So that's that's our expected. That's our flight path, is to get to that 5-week turnaround time by mid to end of October, and that's what we expect to see as a result of all of the work that's ongoing within the unit. We are prioritising cases all the time, and that's based on the information that we receive from the Crown and from the pathologist. It depends upon the different types of cases which we're being asked to look at and the different circumstances in those cases. So if you can imagine, as the testing is coming online within that caseload, it's the priority cases that will be taken out of that caseload and will be reported first. And that's why you'll see the fluctuation within the timeliness of the reporting. But there is absolutely structure in terms of how those cases are prioritised and then reported. The performance information is improving all the time, and I think we're reporting more to this committee meeting than we had reported previously. I would need to go back to understand better if there's any conflict in what I'm saying to you today in comparison with what I'd reported previously, and I'm happy to go away and look at that, and also absolutely happy to make sure that we highlight within the performance report if we've got any slippage in relation to performance improvement that we've discussed in committee, so that that's more clear for future meetings.
That would be really helpful, thank you.
Are you okay with that, or have you got more questions on this issue?
So I have more questions, but not on this issue. I'm happy.
Right, we'll come back to those after I've taken Katharina and Jane. Katharina.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Fiona, for this report. I just also want to take a little bit of time to acknowledge the fact that I think it does reflect that the service has been managing quite a few big priorities, the business as usual, the substantial change and transformation, as well as the increased focus on drug driving as well. So there were a few quite big areas that you kind of had to balance. And what my question relates to the demand versus capacity. And I think, it is a really positive message that for the first time the capacity has been higher than the demand. But if I look at the 5-year trend, it seems that demand has been at its lowest last year over the 5 years. So so it's not that necessarily that the capacity has increased, but that it's at the demand to capacity ratio. And my question relates just specifically, and I probably should know this, but when you're thinking about your future target operating model and the capacity considerations that I know you've alluded to in your introduction, what is the flex in capacity that you're aiming to achieve? I mean, because obviously you will never be able to match demand to capacity, because it's, as we can see, it's a fluctuating thing and it can be unpredictable. So what is the flex in the system that you're aiming for in terms of, should demand surge, there will still be that capacity to meet it, without necessarily having to go through quite a lengthy process of building, etc. So do you have any kind of targets in your target operating model design as to how much flex you want to have in the system?
Thank you, Katharina. With regards to the demand, I think the overall level of demand masks the complexity of that demand picture, because we've seen a significant reduction in drugs cases. Drugs cases are one of the most straightforward types of cases that we do in forensic services. So that's a number of cases. It doesn't reflect the activity that the organisation is undertaking. So just to be absolutely clear on that point. The future operating model is all about improving the speed of the provision of forensic results. It is not about growing capacity. When we talk about capacity in the new operating model, what it does allow is that more flexibility to be able to flex across the organisation to meet those peaks in demand that you refer to there. So at the moment, the organisation is quite siloed, I would say, and it's very difficult to flex resources from recovering glass and particulates to recovering body fluids as an example. So the new operating model intends over time to multi-skill people so that we're more efficient. So we do grow capacity through efficiency, but also it allows us to be far faster. And when you see the performance report and we get to that, you'll see that that is the area that the organisation needs to make the most improvement in. It is around the speed of the provision of forensic results. So within the full business case for the new operating model, we stated within that what we expect to see is a reduction of at least half in terms of the total time it takes for acquisitive crime forensic service provision. So it's all about delivering a better service to local policing and being able to provide faster forensic intelligence and ultimately a greater richness of forensic intelligence across the picture.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think that that's incredibly helpful just to have that reminder and refresher. And I think, you know, this means that the, you know, from a public interest perspective, it's exactly that improvement in time that I think, you know, also from our oversight activity that we need to focus on then, because that's where we expect to see the improvements that you two are targeting. But thank you very much for the explanation. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Jane, you had your hand up, but it's gone down again. Are you content at the moment?
I'm content at the moment because my questions were very much in line with Fiona McQueen's, and I'm sure we'll come back to some aspects of this. Thank you. And
I'll come back to you in a second, Fiona, on other aspects, but are you've your hand still up? Is that for that, or do you have other questions on this item, this section of this item?
It was about the demand, so not about morbid toxicology. Right. So I'm happy to wait. Thanks.
Super. I do have a couple more questions, and the first is relating to outsourcing. Outsourcing, I think, is due to end in August. Does that mean we simply just won't need it because the capacity is being upscaled?
So are you're referring to post-mortem toxicology?
Yeah.
Chair. So we have an outsourcing contract in place. That contract actually expires at the end of August, and at the moment, in order to come in on a balanced budget at the end of the financial year, we don't have a budget for the outsourcing of post-mortem toxicology provision. So you'll see when we get to the finance report that we've spent a significant amount of money on outsourcing to date. So we will look to see if we can extend a contract so it is there if it is needed. But our intention is that from the end of August, we would not outsource cases because the internal provision is now will rapidly work through the backlog of cases that has been created. So the difference of outsourcing cases beyond the 1st of August is not significant in terms of us achieving that return to the 5-week turnaround time.
Okay. My next question is, what is the practical impact of an increase in turnaround times for the general public? In forensic, what's it called, drug driving cases, that would mean prosecution's not happening, but these aren't criminal, so there's no prosecution. What does this mean? Does it mean death certificates not possible, post-mortems being delayed? What is the practical outcome of the increase in turnaround times?
So the post-mortem, the sample's actually taken during the post-mortem, so the post-mortem's not delayed. So the delay is in the provision of the analytical results around the substances which have been identified within primarily the blood samples that we receive from post-mortem. So the practical impact is that death certificates could be delayed as a result of that.
And does that mean families can't bury their loved ones?
Well, it has a variety of substantial impacts for family members in terms of not knowing the circumstances of the death of a loved one, as well as more practical considerations as well. Okay,
well, I mean, the turnaround time has gone up significantly since we've had our last meeting. We've got a commitment from you that this will go back to around about 5 weeks by the time we meet next. There have been things that have thrown this project off the straight and narrow in terms of validation and tubing across, etc. I need to make sure that if there's anything more that's going to delay that 5 weeks, that is reported to board members before the next meeting, to committee members before the next meeting. So we get a commitment for that, whether that necessarily is by circular, or if we need to get together for a special meeting, we'll maybe need to do that. But can you please keep us in the loop, because it's 3 months until the next meeting, and I'd be unhappy if we weren't to make significant inroads into this, particularly for the public outcomes that we've just talked about.
I'm happy to provide members with a monthly update between now and the next committee meeting.
That would be greatly appreciated.
No problem.
Super. Right, to the rest of the report, thanks for that. And we will touch on 1 or 2 other aspects of forensic toxicology, I'm sure, when we get to performance reports. But Fiona McQueen.
Thanks. And just to follow on, I would like to commend Fiona's understanding of the anxiety that families have when they don't have the result. They want to know, they want closure, and I think having that processed is part of a compassionate service that is incredibly important. So people don't know, they want to know the toxicology, they want answers. So I think that's really helpful. And I think the other aspect is that a lot of, from a learning point of view, it's again, primary care teams, secondary care teams can have learning if they know why someone has died. And again, that adds on to that if we can look at that. So from a learning and improvement point of view, it's incredibly helpful. The one question which you've alluded to in your conversation with Katharina, Fiona, and it's about the demand, and thank you for that helpful answering of where we need to get to in terms of recognising the natural variation of the substance of the work that comes into forensic services, and therefore the programme of work you have, so that we can be responsive to that. The increase in sexual crime is perhaps not surprising given the emphasis on violence against women and girls. When strategies such as that are being developed, are you involved in their development, or at least as a key stakeholder, recognising that if there's going to be a violence against women and girls an improved approach, one would expect then an increase in demand for forensic services, so that you can be prepared for that? So it would be helpful for me to understand your involvement when there's a strategic change, a strategic shift across the justice system.
Thank you, Fiona. I think we would seek to be more involved in the development of strategies, and I think one of the key areas that we're looking at and working with Police Scotland on through the Forensic Performance Improvement Group is this demand forecasting short life working group that I've referred to a few times. And that really needs to take into account the strategic priorities, the horizon scanning, a better understanding of how we expect to see demand changing as a result of different policing strategies, different enforcement strategies, so that we can have a better grip on what the demand is of Police Scotland and the Crown, of forensic services, so we ensure that our model is developed in line with that anticipated future demand. It is challenging because it takes time to train forensic scientists across various different disciplines, some a lot longer than others, and depending on the complexity of the work, it can take many years to grow capacity in a particular area. However, we are always looking at crime statistics and trends, and we're discussing it with Police and Crown colleagues in regular discussions, so that we can anticipate how we expect to see different strategies really impacting on forensic services performance. So it's an ongoing discussion. I think it's an area we need to focus on a lot more. We have a group established to do that, and we have good structures in place with colleagues, so that we can have discussions when there is a new approach being suggested, or a different focus on a particular area of work.
That's great, thank you.
Ruth, you were wanting to make a remark at this point?
Yeah, it's just a brief point in relation to this. I know Fiona, highlighted that the different strategies and that perhaps being a reason for an increase in crime. I think what I would say in relation to many of these strategies, which have been over the years, that while they usually combine a need to a desire to build confidence in victims to report, they also at the same time tend to have preventative strategies in place as well. You find this in domestic abuse, you find it in sexual offences, where in one sense that one can balance out the other, hopefully in preventing the crimes happening, but also at the same time increasing the confidence of people to come forward. So whether these strategies are actually behind the rises is something which would be a matter for debate. We certainly found for ourselves, I'm responsible directly for High Court prosecutions in relation to sexual offences and the more serious domestic abuse, and one of the increases for us over the last year, which we take for an increase, with an 18% increase in sexual offences petitions in the course of the last year, which is quite a significant rise. And part of that is due to some legislative changes, which took, rather than strategies, it was legislative changes which allowed us to proceed, certainly in relation to certain domestic abuse cases which had associated rapes, which previously we couldn't prosecute. Now that ability to prosecute in the High Court. Now, I don't think those would particularly have an impact in relation to forensic services themselves. It's a difficult area in which to come to a conclusion as to what causes the increases. So it's just really to highlight that point.
Yeah, no, thanks for those insights. It's like pinning gently to a wall sometimes. Jane.
Thank you. It was just actually following on from what Ruth was saying. I was thinking about the impact of legislation, and that was something the HMICS report actually identified in relation to forensic services. And of course, there's a direct and immediate about what will be the decision in relation to the 6 months, 12 months, which will have a direct impact. And I'm sure we'll come to that when we talk about drug driving. So very interesting area. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Do we have any other questions or comments on this part of the report, the agenda? Okay, if we can note this, that then moves us on to the 3.3, which is Forensic Services Performance Report for Q1. And again, that's you, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, it's me doing all the talking. Unfortunately, Vicky was due to present the previous paper. This agenda item covers the Q1 performance report. Is in the new format. Very grateful for members' comments on and feedback on this. It's a work in progress. We have developed this in line with feedback that we've had from previous forensic services committees, and it is a substantial change in reporting from what we were able to produce previously. We do intend to evolve this report further, certainly a little bit more work to do around the alignment with the performance framework, but this does for the first time bring greater visibility to members in regards to activity ongoing from a business plan perspective, as well as from a people perspective, and then also in relation to performance, and particularly for the first time seeing the performance reported against the targets within the Memorandum of Understanding. We do intend to develop this across this financial year. Beyond this financial year, the intention would be to restructure the report in line with the implementation of the new operating model for the organisation. Beyond that, we have an aspiration to be able to align forensic services performance across into different crime types, and I think that would add a richness to the discussion that we're able to have in terms of the contribution that forensic science makes within the investigation of Group 1 crime, for example, homicides, as well as, for example, drugs crime. So the report sets out the strategic alignment of the business plan to the forensic services strategy. If I take you through to page 5 of the report, this shows on a page the performance against the key performance indicators within the Memorandum of Understanding, which you can see varies across the organisation. There are 2 areas there tracking in red. The first of those is around compliance to priority 2 requests, where the performance is substantially averse to the target. And I'll come on and talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the other area is in relation to the volume crime DNA unit submissions, which have a very tight turnaround time of 21 days from receipt into the unit. And that has not been achieved for a period, and that's due to resourcing challenges. And that is expected to improve, however, is substantially averse to where we would expect it to be at this time. On page 6 of the report, you'll see the summary presented of the business plan activity against the balanced scorecard. Again, we would hope to develop this further into the next report with regards to more of the performance framework measures separated out into the categories of the balanced scorecard. You can see a RAG status associated with the different areas of the business plan, which includes within finance, obviously delivery against the budget, which I've already talked to, delivery of the forensic services efficiency plan. So the efficiency plan is particularly important given that forensic services wasn't able to secure the full investment in the improved full business case for the operating model. So we are offsetting and self-investing within forensic services to drive forward the improvements in the new operating model to improve the timeliness, but that requires us to deliver alongside the change a number of efficiencies, and we are doing an awful lot of work on that, and that's on track at the moment. Other areas to highlight on here in relation to the development of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Plan. So we do have a well-developed plan and a working group within Forensic Services around ED&I, and we continue to deliver against that plan a range of activity within Forensic Services over the coming months. From a customer relationships perspective, we've got the strategic workforce plan demand forecasting piece, which I've also referred to, as well as delivery of the HMICS action plan, which we'll come on to later on in the agenda. On pages 7 and 8, there are a number of pieces of information around our people metrics. Appreciate that members might want to see more in this area, and happy to have that discussion and provide that. On page 7, you can see the gender split across forensic services, and that the organisation is 70% female. In comparison with male colleagues, you can see the breakdown by age, and also some information around flexible working practices that are in place within the organisation. With regards to the sickness absence data on page 8 of the report, you can see that during Q1 we've had an increase in sickness absence across the organisation. Psychological disorders remains the highest reason for absence, and that's particularly high within our scene examination area. There's a number of pieces of work ongoing in that, including the psychological supervision pilot, which is now underway within our scene examination function. So the hope is that that will in time reduce levels of sickness absence within that part of forensic services. We have a page of the report in relation to quality before we then move into specific areas in relation to the different sections of forensic services which we've reported to members previously. I don't intend to go into each of the individual areas, although obviously happy to take any questions on that. Within the forensic services overview on page 11, again, you can see across the left-hand side of that page the demand for services. So this is at top level within the organisation, the output, and then you can see again the breakdown of the individual key performance indicators. Touching on the priority 2 area, this is an area that we're scrutinising internally in terms of why we see a significant reduction in terms of our performance against the target. So we're looking at how our internal prioritization processes are working effectively, but also there's an impact there in relation to the target itself is quite challenging in relation to those priority 2 requests in comparison with the priority 3, which is slightly lower, which is running at 65%. I know that we'll be having a further discussion in the later on in the meeting in relation to the targets themselves, and I'd welcome members' feedback on that. But I'll pause there, Chair, and open to any questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Fiona. I mean, you prefaced this with a remark about board members' input, and I personally have given you a fairly extensive number of observations, enough which seem to be taken on board in this report, so I'm not best pleased with that. I would say that it does strike me as a bit of a parson's egg, and I've read it a number of times. It improves on repeated reading, but there are things that I do have concerns about, but I'll maybe get to those. I think first questions I've got relate to, where are we? The Our People. I think it would be very helpful to have a chart on ethnicity in there. That's on page 7. So then on page 8, we're reporting number of working days lost due to sickness, but they all seem to be lumped together. And it would be good to have those separated out, particularly long-term sick. I think that would be very helpful. It says that forensic service absence has increased by 4% over 1 quarter, which is actually quite a steep increase. Is that gone up from 1.6 to 5.6, or is it 4% of 5.6 or whatever it was last time? Reduction in long-term absence in business support and physical scientists. Again, there's a lack of hard numbers in these, so I think that would be really helpful if we can get some hard data on that, so we can understand what's going down. So the quality page, I wasn't sure if that was really something that should be in a performance report rather than the director's report. It seems like a one-off rather than something that we would want to be monitoring. And then the guide to performance information. I'm a scientist, I'm a chemist, I can read these things, but this is a public committee where the general public are supposed to be able to read and understand these things, and it does seem inordinately complicated. So that's to start with before we get to the overview. And do you want to maybe come back on these points before I move on?
Yes, Chair, and thank you for the feedback that you sent through on the performance report. Unfortunately, there was insufficient time to make changes to the actual charts within the report at that point, which is where you'll see changes reflected in future reports. Happy to provide ethnicity data with the people section of the report moving forward. With regards to the sickness absence data shown on page 8, I'll come back to you with regards to the 4% question, if that's okay, as an action. You'll see within the chart, though, that the long-term absence and short-term absence is broken down for each of the categories of sickness absence. So the lighter blue bar is the long-term absence and the darker blue bar is the short-term absence. Also happy to provide some trending information on the sickness absence data moving forward. With regards to the charts, happy to review those. A lot of work has gone into producing this report in an accessible format. The key performance indicators are complex, and they're complex because forensic science is challenging, and reporting at the different priority levels and across our different the different organisations, so Police Scotland and the Crown Office primarily, it's difficult with the systems that we have and the data that we're able to extract from those systems. So we were hoping that the RAG status would show quite an easy way of being able to understand where each part of the organisation is, but happy to take members' feedback and go back and re-engineer the report as required.
Yeah, I mean, for example, we've got on forensic services overview, demand 2539, but 2539 watts. We've got compliance. Too much of it looks like a report for compliance with an MOU rather than a wider committee service performance report, which is kind of what we need. An MOU delivery one would be something I would expect to happen on Operation Hitch Gold Group, rather than, is it Hitch or whatever, or whatever the group that you have with COPFS and Police Scotland, rather than necessarily a strategic thing that gets reported up to committee. I do have concerns about a number of the priority 2s and 3s that seem to be, priority 3 seems to be generically throughout a lot of this document a much better performance. Priority 2, there's a lack of hard numbers to get to understand for a number of these things, whether something being 0 in red is you've missed one case, or if there's thousands gone off kilter. So I think that's another concern that I do have. I'm also concerned about 39% here, open casework. What does that mean? In figure 3 in the generic overview.
So figure 3 within the generic overview
Yeah,
shows
it seems
the
like
open.
an awful lot.
It
or
is
that business as usual?
Well, this is an improved position, as I stated in the previous agenda item, with regards to the improving performance of forensic services year on year. So this is a substantial improvement based on previous years of forensic services performance, but it still shows that timeliness is an issue within the organisation. We know this, and that is why the strategy and the change programme is in place to change the organisational structure of forensic services, particularly as well the management structure within the organisation, which has substantial investment to improve the timeliness across the organisation. That is what our organisational change programme is all about, improving. So that chart shows the percentage of cases within due date and the percentage of cases that are overdue.
Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Jane in at this point, and then I'll come back to some other points. So Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in fact, I wasn't going to make any comments on overall format, but I did want to look at volume crime, which is page 13, which actually is a good illustration of the very points that you're making, because it is demand versus MOU delivery is absolutely the heading. It was something that, Fiona, you said in your introduction, that volume crime specifically was expected to improve, and no doubt it needs to, because when we look at this, particularly the priority 2 is read right the way through, and priority 3 likewise. So I think my one was for clarification, and bearing in mind this is for public reporting and the public interest. What is the difference between priority 1 and priority 2? And is that a feature of the MOU? So it's actually not within forensics gift to redefine. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, if the volume is expected to improve in this area, how? Can you give us an illustration of how and when?
Okay, I'll ask Helen to come in and talk specifically about the volume crime unit. Helen, please.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Jane. So the volume crime, we have seen a slight increase in demand within the volume crime area. The reason why the priority 2 within forensic services is lower is that all of the volume crime is priority 2, because their turnaround times are 21 days. So that's why we've seen a dip in the forensic services priority 2, because that is majorly influenced by the volume of numbers of cases within the volume crime unit. The volume crime unit is made up of very few reporting scientists, with a greater number of examiners and DNA processing staff. We had to move one of the reporting scientists to second into a manager post to be able to facilitate the changes that we were going through within the operating model. Consequently, we didn't have any opportunity to replace that forensic scientist in the reporting. So that meant that the increases are solely due down to the reporting resilience within that unit. The change program has now moved on in progress. So that individual has now moved back into the reporting role, and consequently that change will happen for the next month, probably 1 to 2 months, to get that backlog back down to where it needs to be. We have a program of works. We're looking at recovery and implementation to make sure that we are using the resources within the local biology unit in Dundee and assisting the volume crime unit to bring those numbers down. Hopefully that answers your question.
Can I just add to that?
I think it probably does, although I'm not sure that I entirely understand it.
I don't understand it at all.
I think
to be honest.
what you've said is that, well, yeah, could you summarize that? Thank you, Paul. Could you just, I think it's to do with capacity and a restoration of capacity internally, which means that that is why you expect it to improve, but I sort of want a deadline. It would be really useful if you could just tease out that question about what is priority 2, what is priority 1, 2, 3, and at whose hand that designation lies.
I'll answer that question, Helen. Thank you. So the priorities are set out within the Memorandum of Understanding. So the priorities are allocated to the Joint National Forensic Gateway as part of the triaging process between Police Scotland and Forensic Services. So the priority 2 is faster. I mean, that's effectively what we're talking about in the different priorities. So priority 2 is a faster turnaround time than the priority 3. Yeah. So that's the target, if you like. But Helen's point around priority 2 is that the volume crime DNA unit was established to quickly turn around simple, straightforward samples from crime scenes so that we can obtain a DNA profile and search against the Scottish DNA database to achieve an identification to pass to Police Scotland. That's the purpose of the unit. So the turnaround time target in that unit is 21 days. The unit is currently performing to around 40 days. So we're not talking about extensive delays here. To put it into context, the issue that we've had in this unit is in relation to the capacity of reporting the cases, given it's a relatively small number of people that report cases in this unit, because it's primarily an intelligence unit, which is doing the searches against the database and reporting to Police Scotland. So as Helen said, that will return within the next 2 months to expected levels of performance. And we should be tracking at least back to amber, if not to green, in that kind of window. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think that's clearer to me now. Thank you. So it's at 40 where it should be 21, but within 2 months you get down. So I think, in keeping with what we've already said, it would be useful to just be sure we're on track, rather than maybe within the monthly reporting, perhaps, just to make sure we're on track, because I wouldn't want to get to November and find it was still out of kilter, albeit it should be back to where it should be. And thank you for the clarification on the priorities. The gateway is therefore as between Police Scotland and the SPA. Is it right that the fiscal, this is not an issue for the fiscal service? Is that correct, or perhaps not?
That is correct. The target that you're referring to there, compliance to Police Scotland priority 3 delivery requests, is exclusively Police Scotland work.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Fiona and team, for listening to what we've asked for and presenting us with a different way of reporting. And I look forward to having conversations and discussions about perhaps what could make it more effective, because actually, as a board member needing evidence for assurance, then I think the ask of the executive are to be able to explain complexity in a simple and straightforward way, and give us measurement of improvement and progress over time. So I don't know, Chair, if we've got a deep dive organised, but it may well be that some offline conversations with us may or may not be helpful. want to go back to the people element of it, Fiona. And I've got a number of questions, if I can just give you them all at once. I think it would be helpful to see the workforce by protected characteristics in total. I'm interested, although there are still quite a lot of people working almost full time in terms of over 30 hours, to know whether or not that's a problem for some people. I'm interested in whether or not you're going to be doing any proactive work to encourage more men into the service. And then the other aspect about the psychological disorder, I absolutely commend you for the work that you're doing on the clinical supervision, and look forward to seeing the results of that. But if memory serves me right, it will be a while before we see outcomes of that. So in the meantime, is our employee assistance programme and occupational health service sufficient to support our people?
Okay, thank you, Fiona, and thank you for the comments. And we can absolutely develop the data in a way that provides the answers to your questions, and you can see it in forthcoming reports, particularly around the protected characteristics. I think the flexible working and the nature of part-time, it goes so far as to provide information. Actually, within full-time working, we still have a number of flexible working patterns across the service. So actually, we've a large proportion of the service that is working in a flexible way. I consider that to be a strength in terms of us being able to adapt to people's home circumstances, different things that are going on in people's lives. And we do have a very open approach to talking about flexible working patterns and being flexible with our staff. So absolutely keen to look into that further to see how we can reflect that better within the data that we're providing. The psychological supervision work will take time to show an impact, and we've got a detailed programme assessing whether it is delivering on the expected outcomes as we go through that. We do have an increased focus. In fact, over the last year, we've had an increased focus on the management of sickness absence, and particularly the support around staff that are long-term absence across the organisation. We are working with colleagues to get them back to work, to make sure that they've got appropriate support. We get a good service from our occupational health provider in terms of the support that they provide to that process. We have a number of complex issues that we are working through with individuals. There are pockets within the organisation with a disproportionately high level of sickness absence, and again, we've got specific targeted interventions in those areas. So I'm happy to share further information on that, and I think as we see the trending data, then perhaps we can use that to have more of a deeper conversation into what we are actually doing in some specific parts of the service.
Okay. Any other questions or observations from anyone at this point?
Okay, that'd be helpful. Thanks, Fiona. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Can I suggest also that I'm looking at the various figure ones, various twos, demand versus output. It would be hugely helpful to have the capacity line on graph 1 as well, going forward in figure ones. That would make it a little bit easier to read across. Can I ask, in chemistry on page 19, you make reference to performing below capacity from quarter 4 to quarter 1. Has that returned to normal yet? And what are the implications of that?
Alistair, could I ask you to comment, please?
Certainly, Fiona. Thanks, Chair. So the implications are around some staff moving around as a result of the target operating model recruitment, and there's also some sickness absence in there. So there is no critical risk in terms of timescales for the cases, and we are anticipating that will return to normal in due course. So it's a transient position, unfortunately, we find ourselves in.
Okay, thanks for that. On page 19, toxicology, again, it's a grim-looking picture, and we seem to have got worse since since Q4. Is this post, not non-criminal talk? No, it's all toxicology. Right. Priority 2, delivery requests. That seems to seesaw between 100% and 0%. What's the explanation for that?
Alistair, please.
Sorry, yeah, thanks, Chair. So it depends on the priorities at that particular time. If there's a particular focus on the Crown cases, for example, we'll try and target that as best as we can. As you'll be aware from previous discussions, the team in toxicology is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, and therefore to try and cover each of the work streams is challenging. We have seen a significant improvement there in terms of the drug driving and also drink driving performance, and now more of a focus has been placed on these other cases. So we will see improvements in them in the coming months.
Right, I'm confused again. So what's the difference between priority 2 and priority 3? And there's no priority 1 again.
It's the timescales associated with the particular types of cases. Again, that links back to the Memorandum of Understanding.
Right.
So within toxicology, Chair, you'll be aware that the unit deals with the drug driving cases, the alcohol testing, as well as the criminal toxicology work, such as in drug facilitated sexual assaults. So you can see each of those different strands of work has a different level of timeliness that is required for reporting. So we have established now, following the work over the previous year, target for the Section 5A drug driving cases, for example. So the target in that unit is for 95% of work to be completed within the 3 months. And you can see that that's at 73% within this table, which is a substantial improvement on where we have been in this area. So really the work falls into the priority categories. The priority categories are based around specific levels of timeliness. And that level of timeliness depends on the type of work and when the police and the Crown require us to return a result.
And priority 2 relates to what?
So the priority 2 work in there will relate to some of the criminal toxicology work. It can be other types of casework, such as spiking cases. It's a relatively small number of cases within the toxicology team, which is why you'll see such significant variances, because it's actually a small number of cases that are being reported. Where you see quite stable variances quarter on quarter, that tends to be where the bulk of the work is going through the unit, so there's less variation, and that would be where you would see the trend improving or reducing over time.
So is that, if it says 0, that's possibly because no cases have been analysed at all, or there's no demand for it?
Or it could be one case has been reported that has exceeded that target.
Okay. What about priority 1?
So the priority 1's primarily around homicides, or where we've had forensic strategy meetings. It doesn't tend to be that relevant from a toxicology provision perspective. That tends to be more around your biology type, chemistry type work, where you're attending a scene and you're having a forensic strategy meeting and you're agreeing very, very quick forensic results to provide input into the police investigation in the most serious of incidents. So that's the very fast work that we do for the police.
Right, sorry, Alistair, did you have your hand up, or has Fiona closed that off?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Fiona's answered most of it. Just in terms of the relative volumes, I think from memory, covering the Crown and other casework side, the caseload is about 145 cases there or thereabouts, compared to the volume of drug driving cases that I've referred to in my report. So that's just to give some additional context in relation to the numbers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Sort of going down, the next slide is post-mortem toxicology. We've kind of gone over a lot of this already. I would say there's no capacity chart. This is actually quite different from the others in terms of format. Why is that?
We will be introducing a capacity line onto that chart, Chair. It's because the unit's still completing the training on the work, so we haven't got the activity data to be able to calculate the capacity. but that's nothing to be alarmed about, because we know that the team is capable of delivering the required level of capacity, and we actually expect that to increase through the transfer of the staff from the university through into ourselves, because we've introduced updated instrumentation. So as soon as we're at stable state, whereas staff are trained and familiar with the instrumentation, the methods are bedded in, and we've resolved these final snagging issues around the ICT, we'll be able to calculate the capacity, and we'll put that line into the charts at that stage.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions on that slide? Right. And just moving on. Scene examination, I've just questioned, what is the capacity for scene examination, or is that how long is a piece of string?
Scene examination is a responsive part of forensic services, so we retain a level of staffing that enables us to respond to incidents within the turnaround time that we need to. So it's not the same as the laboratory areas of forensic services, where we have a caseload that we're always working to.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I think, have we any more questions on this? Colette, well, Jane.
Sorry, apologies, and it refers to the slide a couple of slides ago, and just Alistair very helpfully said, compare the numbers. So the 145 cases with the Crown, with the serious cases, compared to the volume, I think he said, of drug cases, and didn't, unless I missed it, didn't quote a number, because I think he referred to a separate report. Could somebody just remind me what that number is? So it's 145 compared to?
I'm happy to answer that one,
Thank
Jean,
you.
with the chair's agreement. So the figure that I'm referring to in my report in relation to Section 5A cases, the demand is typically 200 cases per month, there or thereabouts.
Okay.
So that's a total caseload of 145 compared to a demand figure of 200 for Section 5A and typically 220 per month for drug driving.
So that would be 200 times 12, where it's total, or are you talking about the total at any one time?
So that's the typical demand level. So yes, multiplying by that with 12 would give the annual figure for
Right.
demand for drug driving.
And is the 145 the annual figure, or the figure at any one time?
That is the figure. Sorry, that's the figure at the moment.
Yeah,
approximate figure.
I just wanted to make sure we were comparing like with like. So it sounds that it's 145 compared to 200 at any one, more or less, at any one time. Is that correct?
So in terms of the demand per month, so if I can put it in perspective, if we went back to September 21, for example, we had in excess of 1,400 Section 5A cases in the caseload. So that compared to the 145 in the Crown and other casework pot, if you like, just gives a flavour of the difference.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll need to digest that. Thank you.
Chair, I think it might be helpful to just revisit that question after Alistair's been able to provide his drug driving update paper.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay, thanks for this. We've given this a good going over. I think this still needs a lot more work, and I think board members need to be a bit more involved in this. So take that as an action that we need to take this forward and improve upon this. I think you referenced that in your preface to this item. I think we've got an action in there that in the action log that we have a balanced performance scorecard, but we do have a balanced performance scorecard at the top of this. So I would propose closing that action off, but creating a new action that we do some further development work on the targets and the performance report. Fiona.
Yeah, I'd certainly welcome an off-table discussion, Chair, with regards to members' expectations and making sure that we are adequately capturing what members are expecting. It's been useful to have the discussion around that. However, I think it would be valuable to spend some time further clarifying so that we can make sure that we've a product that meets the committee's expectations at the level of detail that you're seeking. Thank you.
Yeah, and we need to do that fairly quickly, I think. Okay, we'll sort that out for us. We'll sort something out and we'll take that forward, but that's down as an action. Okay, moving on then, that takes us on to the next item, which, if you bear with me, as I say, I'm working off a number of different documents here. That was Forensic Services Performance Reporting. So we've analysed that, had questions on that, and we've got an action from that. Moves us on to item 3.4, which is the drug driving update. We have Alistair Patience here for that. So Alistair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you. So I'll refer to the paper as read, but I'll draw out some highlights, just items that I would wish to emphasise. So as members will be aware, Forensic Services support the delivery of the drug blood limit testing requirement prompted by a positive roadside test. And the process is accredited to the relevant international standard by UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. As Fiona alluded to in the paper earlier, UCAS visited Howden Hall during the week commencing the 3rd of July this year. An additional assessment visit there that was concluded successfully with accreditation being maintained, and importantly no findings were raised as a result of that visit. Also importantly, UCAS recognised the significant progress that had been made in relation to drug driving since the last visit, and that was pleasing to hear. In relation to the HMICS assurance review, that review has been concluded, and the findings were published in April of this year. Good progress has been made in terms of Forensic Services addressing the recommendations. By reference to the table on page 7, can see the in-house caseloads for drug driving. So that's section 5A and section 4, and also section 5. And I'm pleased to report that the overall reduction in internal caseload to a more manageable level has had a positive impact on the staff within the team, and that is very much welcomed. In section 2.6, I refer to the development activities that are continuing in order to allow us to grow our in-house capacity to deal better with the demand. In 2.8 there, I refer to an authority meeting in June. And since that meeting, we've been notified about one further case which couldn't be progressed to prosecution due to delays in lab testing. Now, that case was reported by Forensic Services in April last year, so it's not a recently completed case, and that was when the challenges were quite stark.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? It was reported by Forensic Services in April, so...
April 22, Chair. Yes, that's right.
And we've only found out now that it's... Why was it not prosecuted then?
I don't recall the background in relation to that individual case, but it was certainly reported by Forensic Services in April last year.
So is this just the kind of catching up?
It was highlighted as a case once it goes through the remaining parts of the process that it didn't proceed to prosecution. Okay. So it's I guess just to provide the assurance to the members that it wasn't a new case. It was a historical one from quite a period of time. We continue to work closely with Police Scotland, the Crown and Scottish Government to manage and minimise risks and to make a decision on the long-term sustainable solution to meet future demand. And dialogue is ongoing with partners in the Scottish Government also regarding the potential implications when the statutory time limit returns to 6 months from its current 12 months in due course. And it's important to note that if that or when that statutory time limit reverts to 6 months, if that reverted at the first available opportunity and the legislation impacts cases prior to that date, there could be significant implications there for time barring of several hundred drug driving cases. So it's important to notify the members of that. In relation to the performance there, in 2.14, I've just drawn out a couple of figures. Internal performance at that particular point in relation to turnaround time of Section 5A cases was 87% and 44% in relation to Section 4, but the number of Section 4 cases is lower, so there's likely to be a larger variation there. But both of these figures represent a significant improvement on Q4 performance. Moving on to page 5, drug driving case aging. So it's important to note that the graphs represent the case aging from the incident date and not necessarily the date that Forensic Services gets it. The graph on the left relates to Section 5A cases and shows quite a healthy reduction there through to the July position of 2.3 months being the average age. Section 4 also shows a marked decrease there, 4.6 months for the July figure. And in terms of outsourcing, also a reduction there over the 4 months down to the July figure of 7.6. I think that's all the points that I would wish to draw out of that. On the next page, so that's page 6 for members, it just gives a profile of the drug driving cases that have been outsourced since October last year. And I've referred to the drug driving in-house analysis and the caseload on page 7 already. In terms of the cases at that particular point, which were within 10 weeks of time bar, they were related to relatively recent submissions and also a request for a court report. So I think the summary there would be that it's in a fairly healthy position. And I think that would be all the points that I would wish to draw out, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Jane, you have your hand up.
Sorry, yes, I do, Chair. I realise that there are two separate aspects to this. One is about current performance, and the other, which is actually the question I'm going to ask, which, so I'm sorry, it might seem in a strange order, is about the future, and is exactly about that paragraph 2.13, and you mentioned the possibility of the change from 12 months back down to 6 months, and possibly even retrospectively. And I appreciate there's a limit to what you can say in this, both in this forum and in terms of knowing what the outcome will be. But I just wanted some indication and assurance about the level of thinking and contingency planning that is being done, given, as you say, there is the potential for a very considerable impact.
Absolutely, Jane. That's a really good point, and it's front and centre of our thinking. So all our statistics, the Memorandum of Understanding for Drug Driving Services, all relate to the return to 6 months. So everything that we are planning on is focusing on that reduction in timescale, and that is in play from now. So we're focusing very much on that internally, and we're also having regular discussions every couple of weeks with our outsourced partner, so they are very aware of the position as well, and the potential return to the 6 month statutory timescale from as early as the end of this year. So it's very much front and centre of thinking there, Jane.
So is that, I mean, there is both the internal and whether that requires greater capacity internally, and the degree to which we're dependent on outsourcing, and what are the indications that outsourcing partners can cope with those more demanding, as I understand it, timescales?
So, as I said there, Jane, we've been in constant dialogue with our outsource partner. We have emphasised the challenges that this would cause, and the outsource partner has given assurance that they're very much developing their own capacity. So they have invested heavily in equipment, also in terms of building refurbishment, and in terms of staff recruitment and training. So they are investing heavily to grow their capacity as well, similar to what we are doing to meet the demands of Scotland.
Although, and I'm sure Fiona is going to say this, that reliance on outsourcing would depend on us having the financial resources to outsource. So it's a Scylla and Charybdis, really, isn't it, as between our internal capacity and our ability to outsource?
Yes, you're absolutely right there, Jane. The funding for outsourcing ends at or that's for use this financial year, and the discussions haven't taken place in relation to future years. So any imbalance between internal capacity and demand, we'd need some form of mechanism there to be able to deal with that, whether it's outsourcing or some other way. But your point is quite correct. Absolutely.
Fiona, Douglas, did you want to come in at this point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to sort of put the structure in and around what the risks are in this area, Jane. So we've a well mitigated risk around capacity and demand being out of balance this financial year. That we've got the improvement activity that's ongoing within the laboratory, which ultimately delivers sufficient capacity to be able to deal with current levels of demand. We know that those levels of demand need to increase in line with Police Scotland's expectations around enforcement activity in relation to drug driving. And really beyond this financial year, there is still the need for a long-term sustainable model for the delivery of work in this area. We now have very helpfully the HMICS report and the recommendations within that report that I think allow a more strategic focus to that piece. And then there's still a piece of work that needs to be done to look at what the long-term solution is here. But it's absolutely clear that there remains a risk that we've insufficient internal capacity to meet that demand. Therefore, continued reliance, money permitting, to continue to outsource to the market in England and Wales. The market capacity is increasing in line with customer expectations within England and Wales police forces, as well as thinking about what our requests should be. And we're very engaged strategically within that conversation around demand forecasting for the whole of the UK in relation to toxicology analysis. The risk in relation to the pandemic legislation is a different risk. And as Alistair's articulated, it is significant. If the extended time bar does not continue beyond the 1st of December this year, then from the scenario planning work that has been done, we know that more than 300 drug driving Section 5A cases would time bar as a result of that change in the statutory timeframe at that point, depending on how it's implemented and whether it applies retrospectively.
Yeah. Yes, I get that. So it seems that you've got three different things. You've got, we should have the capacity to deal in real time and with an expected increase in enforcement. There is the long term around long-term sustainability, and as you say, that's extends into England and Wales. I think the concern, and I accept we haven't got a solution to it at the moment, but we obviously need some understanding of the position, and the solution, if a solution is needed, is in relation to that time bar, that the change from 12 to 6 months. That's the one that seems most at risk and is most immediate. So we're talking about both probability and impact. Okay.
Yeah. And I can just be absolutely clear that there is no solution to those cases time barring if the pandemic legislation changes. There's no additional capacity in the marketplace to be able to access. The cases are in progress, so that is what will happen. There is no way that can be mitigated.
Thank
Can
you.
I
It's
just-
very helpful to be so clear on that.
Yeah, I mean, that is November when it comes up for renewal, which is still what, September, October, 3 months away. The contractor works towards statutory timescales in each police territory because they're turning around samples in England and Wales much faster because they have a 6-month turnaround time, which they don't have the same COVID legislation up here. Is there scope for speaking with the contractor to flag up that this might change in 3 months' time? And they do need to start to give us proper priority to make sure that we don't have several hundred samples going out with timescales.
I'll let Alistair come in and then I'll add to that if that's okay.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I can provide the assurance that we'll be having these discussions with the outsourced partner for several months now in relation to the change and the reversion of the timescales from 12 to 6 months. So it's as a result of these discussions and with other partners, with other customers, that the outsourced partner is increasing the capacity. But similar to the position that we find ourselves in, we're not able to increase, or the outsourced partner is not able to increase capacity immediately. It does take a period of time for the equipment to be validated, staff to be trained, and so on. But I can assure the committee that these discussions have been ongoing for a number of months, and they're well aware of the risk associated with this.
Yeah, that's not actually all that assuring, is the problem. We've got 3 months or 4 months before this might change. It might not change. I'm not going to second guess. This is way above my pay grade, what politicians at Holyrood might do. And they may decide for other reasons not to do that. But we've got a job lot of samples they're contracted to do that could go out of date because they're prioritising ones in England and Wales that have got a shorter time frame around them, and it won't be good news for the contractor if these go out of date. Reputationally, it will be very bad for them. It's recognising that we're within 3 or 4 months of this legislation changing and working some sort of process around that to make sure these are now slotted in as a matter of priority.
If I could come back on that, Chair. So the root cause of the issue here is there's insufficient scientific toxicology analysis capacity within the United Kingdom to service the needs of policing, given the prevalence of drugs driving on the roads of the UK as a whole. And the outsourced provider are having to manage the same complex set of priorities that we manage within forensic services for our in-source provision. So we could say to the outsourced provider, you must turn these cases around as per contractual timeframes. The consequence of that would be significant toxicology work for more serious cases in England and Wales would not be met. So they would miss other contractual obligations they have with police forces in England and Wales as a result of that. So they are managing a complex set of priorities as well as we are.
More serious being that they've got a 6-month time limit and we don't.
No, not around.
But we may do.
Not around the time limit. I'm talking about different types of toxicology analysis for different types of cases. So in the same way as we have serious crime cases sitting within the toxicology unit around sexual assaults, for example, we have to manage those priorities. So the work that we send to our outsourced provider requires a level of experience which is well over and above what is required to report England and Wales cases. They have to grow that experience. It takes time to do that. So in order for us to access additional capacity, it comes at a consequence of their more serious crime casework that they're dealing with in their toxicology section. So the consequences on other criminal investigations in police forces in England and Wales, and it's a complex set of prioritisation. But it's symptomatic of the fact that there aren't enough toxicologists in the United Kingdom to deal with this level of work.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got Fiona McQueen and then Katharina.
Thanks, Chair. And it's all following on from the helpful dialogue that we've had. I think it would be helpful for me to understand what action would be needed to get us to the 6 months in terms of, because at the moment we're being told we can't, but I'm not seeing to have, down one side, this is what you would need to do to get to 6 months, and this is why we absolutely can't. So it would be helpful to better understand what that needs to be. It would also be helpful for me to understand the volume. So we know that volume is likely to increase just in terms of the number of drug driving cases we have and what has happened. Perhaps it's taken us all by surprise, maybe it shouldn't have, but I'd be interested to know in terms of what we're planning to do in terms of volume of cases. Is it stand still, or do we want to grow? Have we got that trajectory? And also then thinking through, are there any additional problems that we might meet, say at Christmas, or are there other times, campaigns that both ourselves and other countries might run, so that we would have that increase in cases? So essentially interested to know what stops us getting to 6 months, when will we get there, and what steps we need to take, and what consideration do we have. But I recognise some of this might be answered in due course when we look at, as Fiona says, a very helpful HMICS report on this.
Could I provide a brief overview just to answer Fiona's questions and then bring Alistair in, if that's okay? So we're already hitting the 6 months internally, Fiona, through the work that's been done and facilitated by the outsourcing. So that if you look at the first chart on page 5 of the report, I mean, admittedly it's an average, whereas in the performance report we're reporting against the target. But you can see of the cases that were reported in July, the average turnaround time there is 2.3 months. So we have done a lot of work with our partners in Police Scotland and the Crown to look at the end-to-end 6 months process that we're all operating within, and that's where our 95% target in 3 months is coming from for Section 5A cases. So we are working to that new statutory time limit internally already. The issue is around the outsourced work and the work that we're doing with the outsourced provider. So I hope that provides some assurance around where we are within forensic services. With regards to the demand, this is something which we've been talking about for a number of years now, and the improvement activity which we're delivering in the unit that the outsourcing allows to happen will deliver us a capacity of 2,700 Section 5A and Section 4 cases by July of next year. That's what the plan will deliver, which we know allows us to be able to meet current levels of demand plus a bit. So basically allows us to insource, if you like, all of the existing work. Police Scotland have an absolutely right aspiration to roll out the roadside testing beyond roads policing officers into local policing. The estimates of how that would increase demand range from around about 3,500 to 4,000 all the way up to 6,000. So potentially a more than doubling of demand in this area. Over the past 2 years, we've been working closely with colleagues in Scottish Government, with Police Scotland and the Crown, to develop options for what a long-term sustainable model for toxicology analysis would look like that would meet those different levels of demand. And there is a long-term sustainable model paper that has been with Scottish Government since April of this year, which has been refreshed from a previous version that was submitted. What needs to happen, though, I think, again, on the back of the helpful recommendations from from the HMICS review is that more strategic view of is that demand really what we expect to see, what prevention and education activity can happen so that we can look at reducing incidents of drug driving on the roads, and therefore what would that then look like in terms of what we would need to build and what's affordable in the current economic climate. So there's an awful lot of work that sits behind the scenes that has looked at how we grow that capacity internally. Right now we've a plan to meet the current levels of demand through internal provision, and any gap that creates we will be discussing with Scottish Government about continued levels of outsourcing in the intervening period before whatever that long-term solution should be.
Grand, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Chair. If I can just add one or two things to Fiona's narrative there, that was very helpful in setting the context. So the point that was asked there, in addition to or in relation to campaigns. So you'll be aware that we work very closely with our colleagues in Police Scotland and in particular road policing colleagues. So we get as much notice as possible of the dates for the campaigns, which gives us the best possible opportunity to plan for that. Now, I know through the regular dialogue with our outsource partner that they are having similar dialogue down south with their other customers. So getting that feedback from the customers, the best possible planning will allow us to be in the best position we can be for forthcoming campaigns. And as Fiona said, through the TOCS development programme, there's incremental improvements in capacity being planned that will take us up to the start of the next financial year, which should put us in a better position than we have been historically. So hopefully that helps with some of the additional information. Thank you.
So that's been really helpful, Alistair and Fiona. Thank you. But I'm probably then just going to echo what Paul has said. You know, what needs to be done for these 300 cases?
I think I've answered that question. Is that there's nothing that can be done to prevent that from happening if the statutory time limit changes on the 1st of December, and that's been communicated to Scottish Government.
So I think it would be helpful for me to better understand, not necessarily just now, it may be an offline briefing, but actually it would be helpful for me to have, and I'm sorry if you've already provided the information, but it would be helpful for me to understand what is it that's stopping that happening.
Happy to provide some further
Thank
information.
You. Thank you.
Sorry, I've got Jane and then Catherine. A rookie mistake there.
Not at all. And thank you. I would just reinforce what Fiona has said. I mean, I think that's been very helpful. It's begun to answer some of the questions that I had earlier, or made it clearer in my mind. But I really would like to understand. I mean, I'm not necessarily disagreeing at all with Fiona. It is not possible, but I'd like to understand why it's not possible. It's like to understand some of what sits behind that conclusion, and how we can test that out, and indeed what the implications are. So thank you very much, and look forward to that further information.
Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of had my head down in interim because actually my questions have been asked and answered, and I think so there's been some really helpful explanations that have been provided. If I think maybe just to add to that extra information around the 300 cases, I think I understand it, but I think what might be helpful to everybody is to understand at what stage, when should we have fed those cases into the outsourcing process or into whatever. So because I understand it's a timing issue, that's at least my take on it. I'm not going to labor this point, but I think it would be good to understand at what stage should we have maybe fed those cases into the outsourcing system or into our own systems, because I think it's a timing thing. So I think we've exhausted this topic at this stage, but so when should we have acted to enable those 300 cases to be within the time limit? That's kind of the only thing that's still missing from the puzzle for me.
If I can just provide a quick response to that, Chair, before we move on. I think that there's really very little that could be done, Katerina. It's dependent upon the capacity that's available either within forensic services or within the marketplace, and that capacity isn't there to be able to have, if you like, prevented that 300 cases from becoming an issue. It's about the fact again that there's insufficient capacity in the marketplace, and therefore the prioritisation is happening according to statutory time limits across the United Kingdom.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that kind of has dealt with the outsourcing aspect of this. I'm concerned also about the in-house provisions. So since the last committee, we've dealt with the backlog. That's now been cleared off. And I'm curious to know how things are progressing in-house with our labs. So I'm looking at it, and in May, there was a 72 cases turned around for Section 5As, and that's down to 39 now. Now, if there's 11 samples in a run, 39 samples being turned around is only doing a run once a week or so. Do we anticipate that picture improving quickly? Or how long are we, what's going on here, Fiona?
Yeah, so this is expected, Chair. So the focus of the staff within the unit is around growing the capacity and doing the improvement work for the next financial year so that we can resource the 2,700 capacity. So that requires us to bring online new instrumentation, develop methods, train new staff that we've recently recruited into the unit, and also to grow the reporting capacity again through training. So we have a toxicology improvement plan that we've reported to previous committees, which sets out the activity that we're undertaking in this area. This is where the majority of the staff time is undertaken at the current point, to allow us to be able to better respond to future challenges. And that was the basis upon which the business case was submitted to Scottish Government for the £310,000 of additional outsourcing funding which we received this financial year. That's based upon delivery of the benefits of the toxicology improvement plan. So the in-house capacity is the residual cases which are over and above the level of outsourcing which we have within the plan. So those cases are completed within the unit, and then the remainder of the time that we have for staff in the unit is on the improvement work.
Okay, so when can we expect that to be up and running fully?
So the capacity increases over time. Again, we've provided that data before, where you can see the capacity gradually increasing. So it's by July of next financial year that we'll see it at full capacity. And it gradually will increase between now and then. Again, it's in line with the demand for the services that we have and the outsourcing which we're doing. So
this 39 cases will be a low point?
Well, the output is based upon achieving the target. So the target is the 95% within 3 months, which then allows the police to report to the Crown and the Crown to undertake the initiation of proceedings. So the level of output is dependent upon the demand within the unit and the amount of work that needs to be output to meet that requirement.
This is another one where I can't actually see any demand line on any of the graphs. It would be good to know what the demand is on a month-by-month basis.
Okay, we can certainly put the demand into the future report.
Yeah, is there anything else I need to ask on this? Yeah, just a general observation about presentation of this. This pale grey, titchy tiny writing in the scales is murder to read. Can we maybe get it picked out in something that's even increasing the size? It's not straightforward. I noticed that in the other report. Anyway, if we can pick that up, that would be helpful. Any other questions or comments on drug driving at this stage? Alistair, do you want it to come back, or is it a legacy?
No, I just wanted to come in if that's okay, Chair. So yes, we'll certainly look at the colour fonts on the graphs, and we'll certainly resolve that for you. Just one final point that I want to make in relation to the numbers, the overall balancing of capacity and demand that I alluded to earlier. Some of the staff who are reporting drug driving cases are also reporting the Crown cases, are also reporting the other criminal cases. So in terms of the scientists within that team, I think we've got 9 at the moment. So we just need to try and balance their workloads as best as we can. So we could focus more on the drug driving output and balancing that with the development activities, but that would have an impact on some of the other areas. So it was just to give that additional context.
Thanks
Thank you.
for that. Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to move on. We've got HMICS drug driving action plan. I was going to suggest a comfort break just after that, if that's okay, because we've got Craig Naylor joining us. Would that be acceptable to board members, or do you need one now? So we'll deal with that if that's okay, and that leaves Craig free to get on with other things. Oh, we've got the finance, but well, let's take the HMICS drug driving one first, and then we'll come back to finance, and that will free up Craig. So great. Okay. HMICS drug driving, and the officer that's leading on that is Fiona Douglas. So.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper is provided for members. I'll take it as read. The update since the last meeting is that action plans have been developed around each of the HMICS recommendations. A copy of the SPA Forensic Services response is attached to the paper. There is work going on across multiple different partners that have a role to play within addressing the recommendations. That is well structured and well organised. There's a strategic oversight board being put in place, which will bring together for the next committee meeting an overview of how well all of the recommendations are being progressed against the action plans that have been submitted to HMICS. So I don't propose to go into any further detail, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah. I'll maybe ask Mr. Naylor if he wants to come in at this point. Have you got any observations, Craig?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's a very good action plan, and I'm very grateful to Fiona and her team, and Barry Sillars and the team in the SPA itself for the work that's been done in it. I think it's a very, very positive and prompt response to that. We do have some question marks over some bits and pieces of it, but I think these are things we would prefer to take off this table and deal with as we're going through it. I suppose the bit for me, based on the previous conversation though, is when are we going to see the in-house capability ramping up? Because that's one of the issues. And then how are we going to make sure that Police Scotland are presenting the samples in time, in a really timely manner, which were 2 of the really key issues that we wanted to pull out. And I was just a touch concerned with recommendation 7, which is going to take to 25-26 to resolve. Now, I get the implementation of the core operating system as a key enabler of that, but what else can be done in the interim before that is the sort of things we want to look at. But no, other than that, a huge amount of work being done. Really commend Fiona and the team on that. Particularly the draft MOU that I think is going to be discussed later on. So there's an awful lot of really exceptional work being done, huge effort being put into it, and we're very, very grateful for that. And we will look to sign off recommendations as soon as we can get the evidence presented to us that they've been completed. And with the amount of green and blue on this chart, then that is looking like sooner rather than later, which is great news. Thank you.
Super, great, thanks for that. Any questions or comments from board members? No? Oh, Fiona McQueen.
Yeah, just something on a reporting mechanism. Very, very helpful to hear Craig's support of this, and obviously I'm also hearing that you're saying there's a bit more work needs to be done, but it's good to hear that on the right track. I'm wondering, Fiona, if we could see a Gantt chart. So we've not, maybe I'm overstepping us here, Chair, when it's to make sure that the progress is monitored and that we know if there are milestones that need to be met, that when they're going to be met, and or whether or not they're going to be met. So it's probably more in the reporting in terms of taking it to the next step, so that we can see so rather than just all of a sudden getting a colour, actually we can mark and chart progress as we go along.
Certainly, Fiona. So I think now the action plan work has been done. So the broader action plans have been developed. Then we can produce a helpful report to members so you can see the progress that is being made across the different elements of the action plan, as opposed to just the overall status of the recommendation itself. I think that will go some way towards what you're looking for.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. If no other question, oh, Jane.
No, and I think that would be very helpful, that sort of reporting. I'm just so alive to the fact that relatively few of the actions are within the gift of forensics alone. So many of them are dependent on other parties. And so we have to think, in a sense, about the reporting across the organisation and elsewhere, rather than it all falling on forensics. I think it's just some worth thinking about.
Yeah.
I think if I could just answer that, Jane, I think that will be where the Strategic Oversight Board plays its part, because that will bring together all of the different partners that are progressing the different actions within the recommendations. So we'll be able to give an update. Clearly, Forensic Services hasn't got a part to play in some of the recommendations and a minor part to play in others, but it will give the committee visibility of where we are across the whole set of recommendations that we have.
And I think, and which is not an issue solely for forensics, but something for the authority to consider internally, is to make sure the authority across the piece has sufficient visibility, because it does touch on so many areas. But that's very helpful. Thank you.
Grand. Okay, thanks very much for that. And as Mr. Naylor rightly says, that we do have to sort out the in-house capacity as quickly as we can to make sure that we turn things around as timely as possible. So if we can note this and the progress, there is good progress made on this. And as you say, Jane, it's not entirely in our gift. So well done to all the staff that have been involved in that, because it's a difficult and problematic area. I'm going to suggest we note that, and then we come back at 25 past, we take a 10-minute break, and the next half of the meeting, or the next part of the meeting, won't be half. I'll pick the pace up, and we can hopefully get through the rest of the agenda quite quickly. Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you. welcome to John McNellis is here to support Fiona and Douglas in the presentation of the finance report. So we're going to go back to the finance report, which is item 3.5. And 3.5, yes. So again, Fiona, you're leading on this, obviously with John's support.
I think John's going to take us through the
paper,
Chair, and I'll take any of the members' questions. Thank you. Thank you, John.
John, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read, but I really just want to draw out some highlights, focus probably on the dashboard on page 2 of the appendix. So we've been talking about outsourcing quite a lot, and on revenue, which our core budget, we're forecasting a break-even position at the end of the year. And within that, there's some variances, mainly caused by the outsourcing. So there are 2 elements that we've been speaking about. Firstly, the drug driving outsourcing. Now that is fully funded by Scottish Government in this year, so that's not causing us any financial issue. And our second outsourcing is post-mortem toxicology. That is causing us an overspend for this year. However, we've been able to fund that because of some of the delays in filling the new operating structure. And in effect, those 2 variances have been able to offset each other, such that we're able to come in on budget at this point in time. There is detail in the report about the efficiencies plan, which Fiona spoke about earlier. We are on track at the minute for that. However, we need to keep watching that. There's still a lot of savings to be realised for the rest of the year, but we are on track. And to give members some assurances on that plan, we are monitoring that regularly. And indeed, over the next few weeks, we're going to be undertaking a midpoint review of progress, where Fiona Finance will be sitting down with all of the heads of services to again review progress in more detail and their plans for the rest of the year. Just quickly on capital and projects, both of those areas are forecast to be underspent for the rest of the year, and the reason for that are outlined in the report. What I would say is in both of those cases that there may be some movement. However, that underspend will go as part of the authority's capital and reform budgets. So if you were in Resources Committee, we have deliberately over-allocated those budgets and had a slippage targets. So part of the underspend in these areas will go towards that slippage target. We just don't see it specifically within the forensics budget itself. And that's really all I would highlight. Happy to take questions alongside Fiona.
Okay, do any of the board members have any questions for John or Fiona on this? Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks both for this. Just a couple of questions. If we're managing to break even because we have an underspend on staffing, and so it's 2 things. 1, when will we recruit the staff? And 2, will the under recruitment of staff cause delay in any of our programmes of work, and is it having a negative impact? And a similar theme for particularly the capital, but also the projects. There's a lot of transformational work here. So an underspend of capital and projects can often then cause a delay, and not only that, it can cause a cumulative delay as we come over months and years that actually we've not got an outcome. So how confident are we that this is a natural variation and that we're going to be able to continue to deliver on the programmes that we've set out?
Thank you, Fiona. I'll jump in, and then John, I'll pass over to you if that's okay. So in terms of the recruitment, it has taken a wee bit longer to get some of the recruitment started, and that's really been as a result of the uncertainty around the budget, which in itself caused a delay until that we got the budget confirmation, which was a little bit later than we had hoped for, and then initiation of the recruitment process and vetting thereafter. So there has been some delay in the recruitment. We are making very careful decisions about posts that we are recruiting, both from a business as usual and from an implementation of change perspective, that none of the underspends in relation to projects have a significant impact around the timing and delivery of those projects at this point. The operating model implementation is a wee bit more complex than that, in that we have to deliver the efficiencies to self-invest in the operating model. So there is a relation between the overspend or the non-budgeted spend on post-mortem toxicology outsourcing, in that some of the savings that we're making around the gapping is being used, if you like, to cover the outsourcing costs. So there will be some delay in the operating model, but the operating model is on a longer flight path anyway, as a result of the need to self-invest as opposed to the upfront investment that was anticipated. John, do you want to jump in?
Sure. What I would probably add to that is on the structure, you can see in the report there is a trajectory of getting back up to where we are with our budget, which is showing roughly around about December that we should have completed the recruitment. Now, what I would say is that underspend in staff costs is non-recurring. It's a one-off cost, which is at least fortunate in the sense that the post-mortem toxicology outsourcing that we're seeing at the minute is also one-off for the time being. So those two do help us, and we will be on an even keel by the end of the year. On capital, your other points, Fiona, I would look at this in the round. Overall, there's ups and downs within those projects. Priorities have changed from when the budget was originally set, going quite some time back. The budget is done at a point in time, probably around about December. So yes, I do understand that we've shifted between costs and TOM priorities. What I would also say is on costs, Fiona and forensics are looking at bringing in some external support to try and help with that project as well. And that's where I'm saying we might see the costs for that project increasing beyond the current forecast. But at the minute, I'm not able to forecast anymore until we've got specific plans.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And just as you were talking, Fiona, about recruitment, many organisations struggle to recruit in terms of the lack of availability of workforce. Are you getting a sense of whether or not we will be able to recruit?
It's a mixed picture, Fiona, I would say. We've had over 200 applicants for some recent scene examination posts that were recruited, whereas we've had some posts we've had to re-advertise because we've not had applicants. So we've got quite a wide range of activity and posts that we're looking for within forensic services. Part of the issue is there's been quite a lot of internal movement within the organisation. So as we've implemented the operating model, there's opportunities for people, which is fantastic, and we've seen internal promotions for staff, but that makes it a little bit longer to actually fill the actual vacancy, if you like, because we're doing the consequential vacancies as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. Can I ask on the efficiency plan, the deliverability RAG status? It seems to be a lot, reds and ambers for about 50% of it. Should I be concerned, or is that just a symptom of it being the first quarter?
I think it's a symptom of it being the first quarter, Chair. Overall, the forecast for year end is green.
Grand. Okay, that's great. Any other questions on this item? Yeah, I'll move the business on. Then if we can note the finance report. Thank you very much, John. And that then moves us on. We'll get back on track to agenda item 5, which is the Forensic Services Change Programme update, and where Joanna Tierney is here for that. So Joanna, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the paper as read. You will see, as per the action that we propose to close in the action log, we've adopted a different format for the paper, looking more to give you reassurance on progress against the plan. So we've included an overall programme plan with dates for submission of various papers and milestone targets through our governance structure, change programme, and then ultimately up to yourselves at the committee. So the overall programme plan, as I say, is to provide the visibility and reassurance that we've had feedback from yourselves before around wanting to see more milestone targets and when these will be achieved. In terms of access to lab and progress against the plan, where we are with the Access to Lab project, we have done the end project report, and we are now very much in the post-implementation review. We've had an initial post-implementation review impact assessment activity carried out, but we're very much looking forward to the benefits realisation and demonstrating that that project has delivered the real practical savings on the ground that we're looking for. Part of that is working in conjunction with a refresh of our gateway principles as well. But with regard to the deployment of scene examination progress, as you know, we've already delivered on the tasking unit go live, which continues to go from strength to strength, which is absolutely fantastic news and a significant milestone achievement for our change programme overall, which has revolutionised how we allocate jobs and deploy our scene examination resource. Early indications are of a positive impact for the project, but we will be instigating the formal post-implementation review process for that project in October. Derek, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add at this point around the go live for the National Tasking Unit from the deployment of scene examination project.
Just to sort of reiterate what you're saying, Joanne, we're seeing initial, evidence of positive aspects on the new tasking unit, with being sent to valuable scenes and therefore recovering more evidence, which is of value to criminal justice. I think that 6-month review in October will show us a bit more data and a bit more robustness about our conclusions on that, but it's certainly affecting positively the allocation of jobs to scene examiners as well, and us being able to attend, hopefully, once we get over that initial period that we talked about from the scenes go live, being able to supply quicker turnaround times to Police Scotland in terms of scene attendances.
Thank you, Derek. Moving on to the data governance, as reported in previous change programme updates, we've done a lot of requirements gathering around data compliance and where our current status is with that. And that's being fed into a revised and updated IBC, which will be presented to our change programme board in October. Very keen to make sure that this project is aligned to the work that's been ongoing in forensic services around our data strategy, and really follow that model to make sure that we are on track to support the delivery of the data strategy as well with the activity in this project. So an updated and refreshed initial business case will go before the change programme board in October, and thereafter escalated up through the forensic services committee as per our governance. The core operating system, as many of you know, we presented at the Resources Committee and received agreement in principle to progress with the FBC development, albeit caveated with the temperature check in November to Resources Committee around providing reassurance around deliverability, affordability and sustainability of that project and the overall change programme for forensic services, and also around colleagues in digital vision, etc., with a view on the overall change activity in that resource area. Operating model, we've really had again achieved some significant milestones in our operating model in recent months. As Fiona's already alluded to, we've introduced our new capability team manager, which is a new layer of people and performance focused management at first line management level for our search and recovery and analysis capabilities. We have been really encouraged throughout the training programs, both for our capability team manager cohorts, with their enthusiasm and their keenness to really get cracking. For many of these, this is a first line management role for them, and as I say, we've really keen to support that with extensive induction training plan, which is a real step away from how we've inducted managers in the past, again working with senior management and our operations level management to support those capability team managers going forward. We have set up in the operating model project a new range of governance, identifying work streams, nominated delivery leads in the business and senior management team sponsors, so that we have got the required level of visibility, joining up all of the activity required across the business to implement the new operating model. And I think that's really going to give us a solid foundation to move forward. Another significant milestone is the issue for many of our staff, their new contracts and our scope and systems transition for our new structure. So we remain on track against the plan for the majority of the activity in the operating model implementation. And as I say, feel that our new governance structure, internal governance structure around the work streams, will really help see that move from strength to strength, and the pace of implementation pick up in the next couple of months. We've had some other successes in the change and development arena, which Fiona has already referred to, around our fire investigation and research facility going live, so I will not go over that. In terms of the benefits management framework and realisation plan, we've done a lot of work on our approach to that, setting out our approach, which will be a kind of distinction between reporting at programme level and project level. So reporting at programme level against the strategic outcomes for a change programme, fully aligned to a forensic strategy. But it's really important that we get the dashboard for that correct, and there's a proper link back to our performance framework and our strategic workforce planning document around the measures, etc. So that's still a work in progress, but we've really done quite a lot of work on what that looks like and how that will be reported back to provide the reassurance that our change programme is delivering on what we set out to deliver with it. So that in short is a summary of the change programme update, and I'm happy to take any questions that
What's
any
the
members may have.
What's the timescale for the framework being reported?
So as I say, we working
or being finalised, I should say.
For being finalised. So that's work in progress, and it'll be informed by how we link it back to the performance framework, taking on some of the feedback on the performance framework for today. But we would hope to be working on a draft for that for the change programme board initially in October.
Right, and of course that will need to be linked up with performance reporting measures as well, presumably. Yeah. Jane, you have your hand up, so please feel free to pitch in.
I do. You referred to a business case going to resources committee. Sorry, I didn't note down exactly which one it was, but it seemed to be hedged about, that approval seemed to be hedged about with quite a lot of conditions. It said if I understood it correctly, resources committee were looking for assurances or a temperature check, as they said, on deliverability, sustainability, quite a lot else. So just unpick that for me a little. Were those caveats of concern? Were those, and what impact will it have if that business case does not proceed to the timetable you intend?
So this, thank you, Jane, this was around the core operating system business case. So if you recollect, I presented the initial business case for the core operating system, and then we were taking it to Resources Committee. We took the initial business case to Resources Committee, where the case for change for the initial business case was accepted, and the need for a new core operating system. We got approval to proceed to full business case development around the preferred option, which is the fully integrated system. But obviously, it's a significant undertaking. There's significant costs associated with it. Caroline, who obviously isn't here today, was at the Resource Committee and very keen on seeing, as part of that full business case development, a strategy for on and off ramping. The question of affordability was around any impact of a cloud storage solution and what the long-term impact to any revenue costs. So the committee, resource committee like that, unpicked a bit further. And then in terms of the deliverability is the availability of Police Scotland Digital Division resource to support the full business case development and implementation to the time frame, given the other pressures on digital division resource in Police Scotland with Police Scotland cause. So really a way to unpick that a bit more and map that out in greater detail as part of the progression for the FBC.
So that, I think, to some extent answered the first part of the question. So the second part of the question is, what was your intended timeline? And I suppose for bringing the full business case to Resources Committee, do you think you are on track with that timeline in view of that discussion? Because there are some pretty imponderables or uncertainties in that.
So as John mentioned in his financial update, we are looking at the option of securing some professional services to support the full business case development, to really make sure that it is a robust and provides the level of assurance that we are on track. In terms of the time frame for the full business case, the intention was always to have that full business case through the governance and approval by the end of this financial year. With the should we be able to secure the additional professional services support, we remain on track. The delivery of the core operating solution for forensic services was very much a phased approach. It was phased over 5 years. So the first part of that phasing was around the full business case development. So as I say, we remain on track. And I think what the Resources Committee were looking for was a more detailed framework of what that phasing looked like. In the IBC was quite high level, and they wanted more detail around how that actually would be broken down, what we would deliver as part of phase 1 in terms of an immediate requirement for our current system, and how we would onboard future integrations with partner systems and our own technical specialist system. So the time frame remains as it is in the IBC, but looking for more detail, as you would provide in any full business case, around what that actually looks like.
And it's still, even if you're able to secure outsourced professional support, some of those aspects, particularly around sustainability, I think, do depend on Police Scotland internal capacity, which cannot really be outsourced. I think some of the IT side in particular. But John may be able to add to that, Chair.
Yeah, John, if you do feel free to pitch in here, John.
Yes, well, thank you, Chair. And Jane, just to add some context, because I did attend the Resources Committee. A lot of these questions are fairly typical of where we are for any business case. And, you know, the part of the role of Resources Committee at the initial business case is to thrash out lots of these things that can be developed over months, so that by the time we get to full business case, we have answers to all of these particular issues. So none of this is really a surprise, and I would expect this for other business cases. On the specific point of funding, that is a concern for, I think, the majority of the business cases that are coming forward to Resources Committee at the minute, as you would imagine. There is a wider task that's going on within Resources Committee to provide a 5-year capital plan. And I can tell you that this project is within that. At the minute, it's in the scoping. As you would expect, there are financial challenges about what can be funded, and there are going to have to be prioritisation decisions made. That's a work in progress, and there will be updates to resources and board and coming up.
Thanks for that, John. Are you finished with your line of questioning, Jane? Grant, thanks for that.
Yes, I think so. That is reassuring without being complete assurance, but that's fine.
Fiona McQueen.
Thanks, Chair. On the financial theme, 2.4 talks about needing further detail on costings and I wondered if there was anything unnerving about that in terms of, do we know what the costings are? Is it going to put the programme at risk? And therefore, given the conversation we've just had with Jane, actually, is funding a problem for this in terms of, do we think that there will be sufficient funding for all of the programmes? And it's just a question of scheduling.
Yes, so with regard to the data governance project, some initial costings were associated with the first version of the initial business case, which were around requirements for logging systems, etc. on EMS. I think what we need to do is the further detail on costings is really around revising that in line with our data strategy, because when that first initial business case was designed, we didn't have that roadmap for our data strategy, and also we didn't know where we were with the core operating system. So the scheduling of the core operating system will inform what we need to do with current systems and how big the data governance solutions would need to be as well. So that's why we've kind of decided to refresh that IBC, because we've got more information in which to put that data governance in context. But we do have some capital set aside to support the data governance project in any case, and that's been factored in.
And deliverability of the programme, are we concerned? Are we getting costs in that are higher than we had budgeted for?
Not with regard to the data governance project, no. And as I say, we're developing the detail of the costings around the core operating system, the core operating system.
Okay. But overall, in terms of the overall programmes, in terms of the delivery of the whole programme?
Well, Fiona has already alluded to, and I think we've reported it previous. So obviously the level of investment around the operating model was not as anticipated, and we're looking at the release of funding and self-investment through the efficiencies plan, etc. So there is a phasing element to the operating model. We have made good progress against our milestone plan, which took into account that phasing approach. And where we are now with our refreshed governance for operating model is really prioritising where that self-investment needs to be allocated to deliver the operating model. A slightly longer frame, but we are on track against our milestone plan as previously shared. Fiona.
Thank you.
Fiona Douglas, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just very briefly, just to add to Joanne's comments there. I think, there's an awful lot of really good activity going on here within the wider programme. It's really pleasing to have a position where we've delivered 2 of the key projects within the overarching programme and already starting to see the benefits of that, and the commitment that we'll bring back a benefits tracking dashboard to committee, so you can start to see that. And there's more data around that. The operating model programme itself is progressing. It's going to take longer than we had originally thought. The core operating system is the key challenge really for us, in that EMS is our current core operating system is coming to end of life, and no doubt we'll talk about that when we get to risk.
Well, thanks for that. I'm going to move the business on because we've still got a bit to get through yet. Thank you for your contributions in that. So I think we're noting this. That then moves us on to the Regulators Code of Practice. We have Craig Donachie here for that item. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the paper as read. The purpose of the paper is to bring members up to date with progress regarding the Forensic Regulators Code of Practice and some of the imminent timescales. For England and Wales, the Code of Practice will come into force on the 2nd of October, which will mean that all forensic science organisations that are reported to court will have to be compliant to the code, and where they are not compliant to the code, they will have to declare that on reports. There are some concerns within the market that this may mean that some previously admissible evidence may not pass that may not be accepted by the court based on the statement of non-compliance. Where non-compliance is declared, there are other ways that providers can mitigate that by saying that it's covered within the management system, even though it's not accredited, but it is going to cause quite a bit of variation in how things have been accepted in the past. As far as forensic services approach, we have met with the forensic regulator at the beginning of June. We held a meeting with partners. Paul, you were party to that meeting as well, and I think it was a really useful meeting to try and get some understanding of what the position is within policing in general, not just ourselves, and the work that needs to be done. Subsequently, there is further meetings being set up by Police Scotland, and in conjunction with ourselves, I'll be supporting colleagues in Police Scotland to provide an oversight and guidance on the requirements of the forensic regulators' codes of practice. The purpose of the paper is really to bring to your attention that we are conducting a gap analysis within forensic services of the requirements of the code of practice. As with any code of practice, it is best practice. It's something that is worthwhile doing, and where there are improvements in the that we can apply to the management system, or where there's guidance that we can implement, we're identifying that through the code, the gap analysis, so that we will have a plan moving forward to be compliant with the code, even though we cannot be accredited to it. There will be further discussion with colleagues in Police Scotland to look at what our shared position will be as regards compliance across policing, and there's also the question of whether Scotland requires a Scottish version of the code. I hate to use the word tartanise, but it's a Scottish equivalent, if you like, that would provide that assurance that the forensic science in Scotland is certainly in par with that in England and Wales. So that's all I really wanted to bring to the board's attention, the committee's attention, but I'm happy to take any questions if there is anything, or provide any further feedback.
Jane, thank you for that, Alison, by the way. So,
thank you, Craig. Just to put this in context, it's a code of practice applicable in England and Wales. Yes. Or the forensic service regulators in Wales, and what I understand, they wish to, and rightly so, to consider what about the position in Scotland. I suppose my question is around what's the risk. You said there's a risk around evidence may not be accepted, but how often is that relevant to the work of forensic services? I mean, how often might you have to be in a position to say we're not compliant, but this is the way in which we mitigate, or is this simply a theoretical?
Thank you for the question. Certainly in England and Wales, it's an unknown at this moment in time what that the factor of declaring accreditation to the codes will be. UCAS have a similar requirement that has been implemented within their documented procedures that state that any report where we are not accredited, it should be identified what's accredited and what's not accredited. As part and parcel of that work, Forensic Services is working to try and determine a pathway to provide that assurance. It is not something that is routinely raised, as far as I'm aware, within court. However, it does provide the scientific staff of that confidence that they have the management system and they have that accreditation behind them to support them. But at this moment in time, it is theoretical rather than an actual result. I don't know if Fiona wants to come in there.
Please do, Fiona.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. So there's a lot of discussion going on in England and Wales, Jane, with regards to the potential risk around declaring non-compliance or partial compliance to the code of practice. There's detailed work being led by the Ministry of Justice, I believe, that are looking at how they can support the courts to understand what all of this means in practice, and to provide a level of assurance around what non-compliance means and doesn't mean, I think, really fundamentally, because there are some types of forensic activity where it's very difficult to be accredited, particularly where it's based on thoughts and opinions as opposed to facts and outputs from instruments. So it is quite difficult to accredit. I think the bigger risk from my perspective is on decisions to progress a case to court, and concerns around levels of risk of forensic evidence, which has previously been accepted, but now there's something stated here to say this is non-compliant with the regulator's code of practice, but these are all the things that we do to make sure that the standard of the work that we're doing is fit for purpose. So I think we will continue to work with colleagues in England and Wales to help them where we can. I also sit on the Association of Forensic Science Providers group. There's been discussions and formal feedback from the AFSP in regards to their concerns, or the wider forensic community's concerns around the impact of this. But as Craig says, we don't really know what that looks like yet. The advice and guidance to the courts and to the CPS is still very much in development, but I do see it as a risk that previously accepted forensic evidence might not be accepted, or a case might not be progressed on the basis of non-compliance to the code, and really that's about the quality of the guidance that's provided to prosecutors, I think, in that regard.
And as I understand it at the moment, that would only apply in England and Wales, because
Correct.
that doesn't think. So my question was really in the immediate and the practical. I can't believe that 10% of the evidence, 10% of the activity of forensic services is relevant to prosecutions in England and Wales. So is it actually just a very, very small number who might be directly impacted immediately, standing we don't know what the long term is?
I think the impact that we would see would be more from a defence community perspective in terms of any concerns raised in England and Wales, and then defence also acting in Scotland and applying an England and Wales code of practice into the court, and the challenge of the scientists that are presenting the expert witness testimony and how we can help them to be able to deal with that.
Thank you. That's very helpful to understand that that's possibly immediate impact.
And thanks for that, Jane. Fiona McQueen.
Just a very quick follow up on that. I think I know the answer, but just to be clear, first of all, thank you for that update. Very helpful. There's clearly a lot of work going on to make this work, and fully agree about accreditation and the benefits of meeting that the standards. So this matter is devolved to Scotland and not reserved. Therefore, from the Scottish courts would be applying relevance in Scotland. Grant, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Craig, for the update, and I'll move the business on to the next item, which is the memo of understanding, which has been a long time coming. So Fiona, over to you again. Fiona Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. So the updated memorandum of understanding is presented for members to note. It is the result of a lot of work between Forensic Services, Police Scotland and COPFS. Lots of different people have had a part to play in getting the document to this point, and I'm very grateful to colleagues in Police Scotland and the Crown for managing to get this over the line. The document is shared with you today in its final format. It is with Police Scotland and COPFS PFS for just final traffic through the governance structure, although have indication that both organisations will be signing that in the forthcoming cycle of governance. So this will be the document that will go into practice. It is underpinned by standard operating procedures, which primarily impact on the Joint National Forensic Gateway in terms of how we accept work into the organisation. I think it's a huge leap forward in terms of setting out a way to tackle some of the issues which we have had around defining the forensic service provision that forensic services offers, as well as a route of escalation and how we deal with circumstances where there's substantial changes in demand. And I think it will be a really helpful document which will help us to manage performance, particularly where there's more demand than available capacity. And it will also help us to triage and make best value decisions around utilisation of forensic science in Scotland. So I think it's a big leap forward. It has been a long time coming, but that is symptomatic of the amount of work that all three organisations have had in getting to this point. So thank you, Police Scotland and the Crown, Ruth and Susie. Appreciate it.
Yes, my question was going to be about where are we in terms of agreement, but you've already dealt with that. Any questions or comments from board members? Jane.
I will, since I've lived with it for quite a long time, to say it's good to see at last, particularly I do think the service catalogue, and it was also good to hear HMICS commend the work on this. So that's obviously been very, very satisfactory. I mean, Section 12 on governance and escalation is good, and it's good to see an escalation process. I'd love to think that escalation to Forensic Services Committee for resolution would be the answer, but I suspect it may need to go onwards from the Forensic Services Committee if we have reached an intractable where you've not managed to resolve issues. But I do welcome the explicit escalation process. So well done, and I would be pleased to see it signed as soon as possible and into operation as soon as possible. Thank you.
No, I'm with you on that. It's been a long time coming. I think if we're talking about benchmarking earlier, Jandice versus Jandice springs to mind. But anyway, well done to all the partners that involved in getting this together. I think is going to hopefully result in a great improvement there. So terrific. Thanks very much to that. So we're asked really to, well, we're noting this because you've got the delegated authority to sign this, and certainly I'm conscious that a camel is a horse designed by committee, so I don't particularly want us going and reworking at this stage when all the heavy lifting's already been done. So so if we can note this, thank you very much for that, and well done Fiona and Ruth and other partners in getting this together. So that is the end of the public session.